Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. Sure, here's the story exactly as requested. Name's Travis Elkins. Grew up around Zanesville, but I moved out to Columbus a while back for work. This happened 2 summers ago when I took a weekend to camp out near Salt Fork. I'd been there a handful of times as a kid with my uncle, so I figured it'd be nice to get away from everything for a couple nights. No phone, no meetings, no concrete, just quiet. I went alone, packed up my little Coleman tent, a cooler, my hiking boots, a couple meals I could heat over the fire, and headed out Friday morning. I got there by late afternoon and hiked about 2 miles off the main trail to a small clearing I remembered from before. Nothing fancy, just a soft patch of ground with some tree cover and a small stream nearby. Real peaceful. The first night was uneventful. I ate, cracked a beer, and sat by the fire watching the trees sway. There was a little rustling in the brush after dark, but that's normal. Raccoons, probably. I slept okay. It was the second night when things got weird. I turned in around 10. Didn't feel tired, just bored, I guess. The woods were dead quiet, more than usual. No bugs chirping, which struck me now that I think about it. Just that kind of stillness that makes your ears feel like they're ringing, even when they're not. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. No idea what time it was at that point. No phone, just my wristwatch. It was pitch dark. No moon, no fire left. My tent was zipped, and nothing felt wrong exactly, just off. That kind of feeling where your body wakes up before your mind knows why. I lay there for a minute, listening. I didn't hear anything, not the stream, not a single branch creaking, just dead silence. That's when I noticed my watch. I keep it strapped on while I sleep, face inward. I rolled over to look at it, clicked the button to light it up. 2:38 a.m. I rolled back over, figuring maybe I just had a weird dream or something. But then I realized the zipper on my tent door wasn't where I left it. I always zip it all the way to the bottom corner when I close up for the night, so there's no draft. But now it was up along the side, maybe a quarter open. I sat up real slow, shined my little headlamp toward the zipper. Nothing. I didn't hear anything still. Just the kind of quiet that starts to press on your chest after a while. I opened the flap and looked outside. Everything, and I mean everything, from my sight was outside the tent. My pack, boots, flashlight, cooler, cooking pot, folding chair, even the damn trash bag. All laid out in a perfect grid, maybe 4 feet between each item, just sitting there on the ground like someone had inventoried them. My sleeping bag and pillow were the only things still inside with me. I stood there in the doorway, light swinging back and forth between each object. There were no footprints in the dirt, no drag marks. The ground was soft enough that I should have seen something. Raccoon prints, boot treads, something. But it was just smooth, pressed down grass and a few scattered pine needles. At first, I thought maybe I'd gotten up during the night and done it myself, sleepwalking, but I've never done anything like that before. Plus, the layout was each thing set parallel, facing the same direction. My socks were folded and set beside my boots. The lid of the cooler was propped open with a stick, like it was being displayed. I circled the site, still no noise from the woods, no breeze. Even the stream sounded like it had stopped. Then I checked my watch again, 2:49. I remember that clearly because the light didn't work at first, like the battery had died, but then it flicked on again. 11 minutes had passed since I first woke up. But I didn't feel like I'd done anything for those 11 minutes. I checked the zipper, looked out, scanned the site, and walked maybe 2 circles. That couldn't have taken more than 2 or 3 minutes. I know time feels weird in the dark, but I swear I lost something there. I packed up right then. Didn't even bother trying to make sense of it. Stuffed everything back into the pack. Shoved loose items in wherever they'd fit. I left the trash bag tied to a branch. Figured I'd come back later, but I never did. I hiked out with my flashlight on full beam. Took the trail back to the car with the light bouncing all over, not even caring if I made noise. Didn't pass anyone, didn't hear a single sound. Not an owl, not a twig snap. Made it back to the car a little after 4. Sat in the driver's seat for a while with the door locked, staring at the woods. I checked the watch again. Still ticking, still lit up fine, said 4:12. But here's the weirdest part. Later that morning, I emptied my backpack on the kitchen floor back in Columbus, and at the very bottom, buried under my spare shirt and trail mix bag, was a pine cone. A big, fat, green pine cone, still sticky with sap. I don't remember picking one up. I definitely didn't pack one. But there it was, sitting dead center like it had been placed there carefully. None of my stuff was missing. But the folding knife I'd brought, the one I'd set next to my chair when I went to sleep, was completely clean, like factory clean. No grime, no fingerprints. Even the little bit of sap that had been stuck near the hinge was gone. I'd used it the night before to cut open a package of jerky, and I remember thinking I needed to clean it later. But it was spotless, shiny. I still don't have a clue what happened that night. I didn't tell anybody about it for months, not even my cousin who camps with his kids out there all the time. I kept thinking maybe I'd find a logical answer, like maybe I had sleepwalked or a prankster came through, but nothing fits. There were no animal tracks, no signs of another person. The gear was arranged too carefully to be random, and that weird, quiet, heavy air, it didn't feel natural. I haven't been back to Salt Fork since. I still camp sometimes, but only at state sites with neighbors. And I check my watch every few hours, even if I'm not awake, just in case. Name's David Reiner. I live in Akron now, but this happened back in February, about 3 years ago, when I was still renting that little place outside Brecksville, right on the edge of the park. I used to walk my dog, Wally, golden retriever, real mellow guy, along the towpath trail almost every day. Even in winter, we'd go out just before sundown. He didn't care about the cold, and honestly, I liked having the place mostly to myself. That stretch between Red Lock and Boston Mill gets real quiet in the off-season. This particular evening had that weird kind of stillness to it. You know the kind. Skies overcast, but not thick enough to snow. Just gray and flat. No wind, no birds, not even the usual rustling in the trees. It was cold, like mid-20s, but not bitter. And everything had that slightly damp, heavy feel, like the air wasn't quite right. We were about 20 minutes down the trail when Wally started acting funny. He froze up by this bend near one of the little offshoot paths that leads to a clearing with a pond. Normally, I'd have to tug him away from that path. He always wanted to sniff around there. But this time, he just stopped and stared into the trees. Ears up, body stiff, tail down. I followed his gaze, but didn't see anything. Just the same thin trees and crusted over snow. I gave the leash a light tug. "Come on, bud," I said, but he didn't move. Not even a flinch. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright, not like a flashlight or car headlights, more like the soft white blue of a fluorescent bulb on a dimmer. It was coming from the direction of the pond. I couldn't see the source at first, just that faint light through the trees. And it wasn't steady. It pulsed real slow, like a heartbeat almost. Bright, then dim, then bright again. Now, I've been out in those woods more times than I can count. I know what a headlamp looks like, or a lantern, or even somebody's phone screen. This wasn't that. It didn't cast shadows, didn't flicker like firelight, just this steady, slow rhythm, maybe 50 yards in. Wally made a low whining sound in his throat and sat down right in the middle of the trail. Wouldn't budge. I stepped off the main path toward the light. Not far, maybe 10 or 15 steps in. Snow crunched under my boots, and the branches made that brittle snapping noise when I brushed past. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to pop out and yell at me for trespassing, but there wasn't anybody. Just trees and that soft, breathing glow. I came to the edge of the clearing, and that's when I saw it. There was this little pond, maybe 30, 40 feet across, completely frozen over. No tracks on it, no branches, just smooth, solid ice with a dusting of snow. And maybe 5 feet above the center of the pond, hovering in the air, was this sphere of white light. Perfect sphere. Maybe the size of a beach ball. It wasn't casting light exactly, more like it was the light, glowing from within. The pulsing was more noticeable up close, and it wasn't just visual. I could feel it faintly in my chest, like when you're near a bass speaker, but quieter, deeper. Not sound, not quite vibration either. Just presence. I pulled my phone out like an idiot, thinking I'd snap a photo. I didn't expect it to work, but I had to try. The screen lit up, but it was wrong. Everything on it flickered and bent, like a heat wave or old VHS tracking. The pond looked smeared like wet paint, and the sphere wasn't showing up at all. Just a warping spot where it should have been, like the pixels were dodging it. I switched to video. Same thing. The whole screen jittered, and then the camera app froze. Phone locked up solid. I tried backing up slow, just easing toward the trees again. But as soon as I took a step, the sphere shifted. It didn't move like a bird or a drone or anything normal. It just tilted, like it had turned its attention on me. Not facing me exactly, it didn't have a front or back, but I felt noticed. Like when you're at a party and suddenly realize someone's staring at you from across the room. The glow dimmed a little. Then, without a sound, it dropped, straight down, right into the ice. I don't mean it cracked through, I mean it passed into the surface. No ripple, no splash, no break. 1 second it was hovering, and the next it was just gone, like it had been absorbed. The glow faded instantly. The pulsing stopped, and just like that, everything was normal. Sort of. I stood there staring at the ice, half expecting it to shoot back up or something, but nothing happened. The ice looked totally undisturbed. Not a mark on it. Not even a wet spot. Then I realized the silence had lifted. I could hear distant traffic again. A crow cawed off to my left. My phone buzzed in my hand as it restarted itself. Wally barked once, sharp and anxious from the trail. I walked back fast. Didn't run, but my legs sure wanted to. Wally was already on his feet when I got close, tail tucked, pacing in a tight circle. He pulled on the leash the second I grabbed it, like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. We didn't stop till we got back to the car. When I checked my phone later, the camera app had crashed and rebooted, but no photos or videos had saved. Not even corrupted ones. Just blank, like I hadn't tried at all. I went back 2 days later in broad daylight. Brought a thermos of coffee, figured I'd hang out by the pond for a while and see if anything happened. But it just looked like any other frozen pond in the woods. A little runoff had frozen along the edges, and there were deer tracks across the far side. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, sipping coffee and feeling dumb. That was it. Never saw anything like it again. Never really talked about it much either. Not until now. I don't know how to explain what I saw that night, but I'm still thinking about it, even weeks later. I'm Tom Reynolds, and I've been farming out here near Delaware, Ohio for most of my life. The farm's been in the family for 3 generations now. It's nothing fancy, just a couple hundred acres of corn and soybeans, the usual Midwest stuff. Quiet place, especially once the sun goes down. This all started right after the first big snow last December. I was out doing my usual morning rounds, checking fences, making sure the equipment was good, and that's when I noticed something weird in one of the cornfields I hadn't gotten around to harvesting yet. One row, maybe 50 feet long, had all its stalks bent sharply at about a 90-degree angle, right in the middle of the stalks, like someone took each stalk and folded it over. The weirdest part? The plants weren't broken or snapped, not even cracked, just bent perfectly. I mean, this wasn't your usual snow or wind damage, and it didn't look like deer or raccoon damage either. Usually, if something steps on a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked deliberate, like some precise crease down the entire row. I ran my hand along a few stalks. They were stiff but intact, like cardboard that had been folded sharp but not torn. No signs of heavy machinery, no tire tracks, nothing. The rest of the field was untouched. No footprints or anything near that row. Just that one precise line of folded stalks. I figured maybe it was some freak accident with the weight of the snow pressing down unevenly. But even then, it didn't sit right. Snow was light that morning, and the rest of the field looked fine. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, but they don't really capture how odd it was. That night, the farm was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles when the wind dies and all the usual nighttime sounds stop. Around 11:30 p.m., I woke up because of a noise on the roof. It was pacing. I don't know how else to describe it. Like something big was walking back and forth up there, slow but deliberate. Heavy footsteps, maybe 4 or 5 steps, then a pause, then the same pace again. It wasn't like an animal, no scratching or scurrying, more like something that weighs a lot but was careful not to make too much noise. I lay there frozen for a bit, listening. After a few rounds, the noise stopped, and I waited for a while but didn't hear anything else. When I got up the next morning, I went outside to check the roof. Nothing looked disturbed. No dents, no footprints, no marks on the shingles. It had snowed lightly overnight, so I was expecting at least some tracks, but the snow on the roof was untouched, smooth like glass. I walked around the house, the barn, the shed, no footprints anywhere near the house, no tire marks, no animal prints. The snow was clean, like no one had been out there all night. I felt uneasy. It was like the noise had been there, but nothing had left a trace. That day, I went back to the field to look at the bent corn again. When I got closer, I noticed something else. The row of folded stalks wasn't random. It formed a sort of pattern. I'm not saying it spelled anything out, but the way the bent stalks aligned created a repeating spiral shape, kind of like a loose coil running the length of the row. It was subtle, almost like the corn was pointing somewhere or trying to communicate, but I can't say for sure. I'm not one for wild stories, but it looked deliberate. I ran my fingers over the stalks again, and the cold of the night still felt like it was hanging in the air there, even though it was the middle of winter. The rest of the day was normal. I kept expecting someone to show up, a neighbor or the sheriff asking questions, but no one did. No calls, no reports. That night, I stayed inside with the porch light on, half expecting that pacing noise again, but nothing. Just the quiet. Over the next few days, I kept going out early to check the field, but the stalk stayed folded, no change. The spiral pattern stayed sharp and clean, like someone was maintaining it, though I never saw anything or anyone. I thought about setting up some cameras, but I'm old school. I don't trust all that fancy equipment, and besides, it felt like whatever it was didn't want to be caught. Like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something moving near the tree line that edges the field. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a stray dog, but whatever it was, it slipped into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no snapping branches, just gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then last week, I was working in the barn when the power went out. Not just my place, the whole area. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, but off in the distance beyond the trees I could see a faint glow. It wasn't the usual orange or white from a nearby town. It was bluish, almost like the color of a police cruiser's emergency lights, but steadier, pulsing softly. The glow lasted maybe 5 minutes before fading completely, and the power came back on just as suddenly. The whole thing felt like a message, though I can't say what. Now the corn's all harvested, and the field looks normal again. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, the ground's soft and muddy. But sometimes when I'm out here alone, I swear I catch the same quiet pacing sound on the roof or a flicker of that strange blue glow through the trees. And every time, the hair on my arms stands up. I don't know what's out there. I don't know if it's someone watching, something messing with the fields, or just the way my mind's trying to make sense of all this. But the one thing I'm sure of is that row of corn. That perfect, sharp fold, that spiral pattern. It wasn't an accident. And whatever walked my roof that night, it left no footprints. You don't expect much to happen on a Thursday night at the Springfield Community Baseball Field. It's not a big stadium or anything, just the usual setup with 4 poles holding the floodlights, a worn-out chain link fence, and a cracked asphalt parking lot that smells like old popcorn and fresh-cut grass. I've been coming here since I was a kid, and honestly, most nights it's just crickets, the occasional late jogger or some group of teenagers messing around. That night, though, everything felt off right from the start. I'm Mark Dutton, by the way, and I live just a few blocks from the field, so I usually come here to clear my head after work. It's quiet, and there's not much to worry about. I got there around 10:15 p.m. It was chilly for late July. Ohio summers get humid, but that night the air was strangely still, like someone hit pause on everything. There were a handful of teens sitting on the bleachers. They were tossing a baseball back and forth, laughing, but it wasn't the usual loud, easygoing noise you hear. They were quieter, watching the sky more than the game. I figured maybe someone spotted a satellite or something, so I looked up too. That's when I saw it. Hovering right above the tallest floodlight pole was this weird shape. I don't even know how to describe it right. It wasn't like any airplane or drone I'd ever seen. It was a dark shape, almost a silhouette, but it didn't have clear edges. More like a shadow hanging in the air with this faint, almost oily shimmer around it, like heat haze, but colder, if that makes any sense. No blinking lights, no sound, nothing that should be there at all. The teens noticed it too. One of them, a kid named Joey, I think, pointed at it, eyes wide. "Hey, what the hell is that?" We all stayed quiet, just watching. The ball got dropped, and no one said a word. Then, after a minute or so, one of the kids, a girl named Casey, picked up a rock from the dirt near the fence and threw it straight at the thing. Like, it was almost a reflex, but braver, or maybe just dumb. The rock didn't hit anything, it just kind of disappeared as it flew through the shape. And then, the whole thing vanished. Just like that. No sound, no flash, no trick of the light. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. But that's not the worst part. Right after it disappeared, every single floodlight on the field exploded at once. Not just flickering or going out, full-on explosions. The lights blew out with this loud pop and sparks flying everywhere. The glass shattered and fell like rain, and the whole field went pitch dark. I swear, the way that happened was like someone pulled the plug on reality for a moment. Everyone froze. The teens started yelling and scrambling for their cars. I could hear a few people cursing about the lights, the noise, all that. I was standing there, heart pounding, thinking, what the hell did I just see? It got quiet again, except for the broken glass tinkling on the ground. I walked over to the fence, looking up at the empty sky where the thing had been hovering. The stars looked normal, but I felt like something was missing. Like the night had a gap, a blank spot in the usual hum of sounds and smells. A couple of the teens hung back, eyes glued to the dark tree line beyond the parking lot. Joey kept saying, "Did you see that? That thing was real. It just vanished." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if I wanted to admit I was freaked out or not. We stood there for a few minutes, the only light coming from the street lamps down the road. Then out of nowhere, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, but it wasn't my usual notifications. The screen was weird, all staticky, like it was having trouble pulling a signal. The time jumped back and forth, flickering between 10:18 and 9:42 for a good 20 seconds before settling at 10:19. I showed the others. They all looked confused. Casey said her phone had been acting weird too, like it lost service for a bit and then popped back on. I'm not sure how long we stood there after that, but the feeling of being watched started to creep up on me. Like someone or something was standing just beyond the trees, staring. I glanced over my shoulder a few times but never saw a thing. The weird thing about that place is how open it is. There's nowhere to hide behind the field except the woods on the edges. You can see the road and some houses a ways off. But that night, the woods felt like a wall of silence. No rustling leaves, no animals, just stillness. After a while, I told the kids to get going before someone called the cops about the lights or something. We said our goodbyes, but none of us looked away from the dark tree line. When I got home, I tried calling my wife, but the call wouldn't connect. The phone showed no service, which was odd since I usually get a full bar right there. I checked all the windows and doors, made sure the house was locked, but the unease stuck around. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every flicker of streetlights outside, felt like a sign something was watching. The next morning, the field was a mess. The exploded lights had left scorch marks on the poles and glass everywhere. The town crews showed up and started repairs, but the story about what happened spread fast. No one knew what the hovering shape was. Some said it was a drone, others joked about government experiments, but no one could explain the silence it came with, or how it just disappeared when hit by a rock. Since then, I've gone back to the field a few times, but it never felt quite right. The place is the same, sure, grass, dirt, fences, but when I'm there, I can't shake the feeling I'm not alone. Sometimes when I'm driving home at night, I catch a flicker in the sky, just out of the corner of my eye, A shadow that doesn't belong, hanging just a little too still. I can't say what that was or why it came to Springfield that night. I only know that the baseball field lights blew out exactly the moment it vanished. And after that, my phone's clock went all screwy for a bit. And whatever that thing was, it didn't want us throwing rocks at it. My name's Mike Hollister, and for the better part of 2 years, I worked the night shift at this radio tower out near Wilmington, Ohio. It's about as isolated as you can get around here. Fields stretching for miles, no neighbors close enough to hear you shout, and the nearest town a good 20 minutes away if you're driving the speed limit. The tower itself was pretty standard for the area. A tall steel frame with antennas sticking out all over, surrounded by a chain link fence and a little gravel lot for the truck. My job was simple on paper: monitor the tower, keep tabs on the equipment, report any problems. Mostly, it was just sitting in the small control room inside the building and watching a bunch of screens and meters. Most nights were quiet, too quiet sometimes. The hum of the machines, the occasional radio chatter, and the sound of the wind pushing through the trees was about all I got to keep me company. On clear nights, the stars were bright out there, but the darkness was thick enough to swallow up anything beyond a few yards. One night in early October, right as the leaves were starting to turn, something happened that I still can't really explain. I was halfway through my shift around midnight when the first signs showed up on the monitors. I noticed static creeping across all the channels. Faint at first, like someone fiddling with a dial on a cheap radio, but it quickly got worse. Voices and signals dropped out or scrambled into nonsense. Even the emergency channels went dead. It was like the whole spectrum was being choked. I fiddled with the equipment, checking cables, restarting the transmitter, anything I could think of. Nothing helped. The static stayed, and whatever signals were out there, I couldn't pick them up. That's when I noticed it. Through the window, down in the tree line beyond the fence, little lights blinking in a pattern. Not the usual fireflies or distant cars. These were steady, deliberate, small, white or bluish lights that blinked on and off like Morse code or a rhythm. About 10 or 15 feet above the ground, they moved slowly side to side, almost like they were scanning the tree line. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but the lights seemed to respond to me. When I stepped back from the window, they dimmed. When I leaned closer, they blinked faster. The whole place had gone dead silent, except for that static in the speakers, and the rhythm of those blinking lights felt oddly synchronized with the interference. I grabbed my jacket and decided to step outside. The air was cool and crisp, and the gravel crunched under my boots as I walked to the gate. The tower's floodlights lit the immediate area, but beyond that, the trees were an unbroken wall of black. I called out a few times, half expecting maybe some other late-night worker or local to be messing around. No answer. The lights were still there, blinking in the same slow pattern just beyond the tree line. I took a few steps toward the woods, then everything changed. Right as I crossed the threshold of the gravel lot, the static on the radio stopped. The monitors flickered back to life. Clear signals, normal chatter, and the lights, gone. Just gone. No flicker, no trace. One moment they were there, and the next, not a thing. I stood there for a while, looking into the darkness where the lights had been, trying to make sense of it. The woods looked normal. No shadows shifting or shapes moving, just the usual trees and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I figured I'd imagine the whole thing. Maybe my mind was playing tricks after too many hours alone. So I went back inside, restarted the equipment just to be sure, and sat down. The screens were steady now, the static completely gone. But then I noticed something else. On one of the signal logs, there was a blip, an unexplained spike in interference that matched the timing of those lights. It wasn't just static, it was like some signal was trying to push through and then vanished right when I stepped outside. I spent the rest of the shift staring at the monitors, trying to catch anything else, but the night stayed normal after that. No more lights, no more interference. I mentioned it to the daytime guy the next morning, but he just laughed it off, said it was probably some weird atmospheric condition or a glitch in the system. I wasn't so sure. After that night, I kept an eye out for anything strange. But nothing like it happened again. Not at the tower, not anywhere else around Wilmington. The night stayed quiet, the equipment ran smooth, and those blinking lights never showed up. Still, sometimes when I'm driving home late or standing outside looking up at the stars, I think about that night, about the signals that disappeared the moment I stepped outside and the lights and the Lecites that seemed to watch me from the edge of the woods. I don't know what I saw or what those signals were trying to say. All I know is that night shift out there changed the way I see things, even if I can't put my finger on exactly why. I was out on the Ohio River near Cincinnati just past dusk when I noticed something weird that's been bugging me ever since. I'm Mike Turner, by the way, a regular guy who spends a lot of time fishing around the river. Been doing it for years, mostly at spots I know well. That night, I was near the California neighborhood, right where the water gets a little slower and darker under those old bridges. Perfect for catfish or the occasional bass. I'd launched my little John boat a couple hours before sundown. Nothing special, just me, my gear, and a couple of beers stashed in a cooler. The river was calm, the sky mostly clear with a few clouds hanging low, and the usual sounds of the city drifting from downtown. I had my rod set up on the side, and I was just relaxing, waiting for a bite. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught something strange on the water. At first, I thought it was just reflections from one of the barges that sometimes float by at night. But these lights didn't match any boat lights I'd ever seen. They were faint, kind of bluish and greenish, almost like old fishing lures glowing beneath the surface. The odd part was the way they moved. Instead of drifting like a boat or floating debris, the lights seemed to shift slowly, like they were part of some shape that was twisting just under the water. It wasn't a solid shape, more like a ripple of light that changed patterns, but stayed roughly in the same spot, maybe 20 feet from the boat. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it at the spot where the lights were. As soon as the beam hit the water, the lights vanished like someone flipped a switch. I thought maybe it was some kind of underwater reflection, so I flicked the light on and off a couple times, but each time, again, the lights came back when the beam moved away, only to disappear again when I shined it directly at them. I checked around for other boats, but there was nothing. No sounds, no running engines, no flashing red or green navigation lights. The usual river traffic had slowed down, probably because it was getting late. Even the barges seemed to have stopped moving by then. Just me and the river. I started feeling a little uneasy, not gonna lie. The river's always had its mysteries, but I've never seen anything like this. I wanted to get a better look, so I grabbed the small net we keep in the boat and dipped it into the water near where the lights showed up. No splash, no resistance, just normal river water. That's when I noticed the water temperature felt off. Not cold like usual at night, but kind of warmer in that exact spot. I mean, the river is wide and deep, so small warm patches aren't unheard of, but it felt strange. Like something was shifting under the surface, but I couldn't see any movement or hear anything. I put the flashlight down and just sat there for a while, watching. The lights came back, those faint, pulsing colors, shifting in patterns that almost looked deliberate, like someone tracing shapes underwater with a glow stick. I kept thinking I might be dreaming or half asleep, but I was wide awake. After a few minutes, I thought I saw something else, a faint ripple, like a shadow, moving just beneath where the lights were. Not a fish or a log, something more fluid. I blinked and it was gone. I reached for my phone to check the time and maybe call my buddy, but the signal was dead. Typical around there late at night. No worries. I figured I'd just keep an eye on things and head back to the dock soon. That's when the humming started. It wasn't loud, more like a low vibration that filled the air and the water itself. Not like a motor or anything mechanical, more like a tone you feel more than hear. It mixed with the soft rustling of the river against the boat. I felt a tickle on the back of my neck and looked around, but the riverbank was dark, the trees still and silent. No other boats, no animals, just that humming and the shifting lights below. I tried to shake off the feeling and decided to reel in and get ready to head back. As I started moving the boat, the lights vanished completely as if someone pulled them under or turned them off. The humming faded with them. I glanced back once more before I cut the engine. The river was just dark, quiet, and normal again. On the ride home, my radio kept cutting out, static and faint voices I couldn't make sense of, like snippets of a conversation far away. But no stations were supposed to be on at that time. My GPS blinked a couple times, showing my location jumping a few feet here and there, like signal interference. Once I got home, I looked over my gear, trying to find some logical explanation. No weird reflections, no equipment malfunction, just that feeling, like the river had shown me something I wasn't meant to see. I haven't told many folks about it. Around here, people either laugh or start spinning stories about river monsters or ghosts, and I'm not into that. I don't know what those lights were or why they appeared the way they did, but they weren't normal boat lights, and they weren't anything I can explain. The river's been quiet since, but every now and then, when the night's calm and the water's glassy, I swear I catch a glimpse of something glowing just beneath the surface, shifting and pulsing like a slow heartbeat. And I wonder if it's still down there, waiting. I was driving my usual route through Ohio, hauling a load from Indianapolis up toward Cleveland. I'm Mike Dalton, been trucking for over a decade now, mostly the Midwest run, so I know these highways like the back of my hand. I was on I-75 northbound, somewhere near Findlay, around 11:30 at night. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the hum of the engine and the road lights streaking past. I was running a little late, but nothing too crazy. That stretch near Findlay has always been kind of quiet at night, not a lot of traffic, but it's usually easy to keep pace with the few cars that are out there. This time, though, something was off. About halfway through the county, just past the exit for Ohio 12, the air suddenly got heavy and thick. I mean, thick, like you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face, thick. A fog rolled in out of nowhere, dense and silent. At first, I thought maybe it was just some local patch of fog. I hit the wipers, but they didn't help. There was nothing to wipe, just this solid white that swallowed everything. The headlights barely reached beyond the front bumper. I slowed way down, tapping the brakes lightly, eyes peeled for whatever might pop out. Then I glanced down at the GPS. It's a Garmin, nothing fancy but reliable. It blinked off for a second and then came back on, but it was wrong. The screen showed my truck in the middle of some place called Vermilion, which is over 50 miles east near Lake Erie. That didn't make sense. I was definitely on I-75 northbound, nowhere near the lake. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a glitch or the fog was messing with the signal, but the GPS kept flickering, sometimes showing the right highway, sometimes flipping back to Vermilion. The map was jumping around, and the estimated time jumped forward and backward like it couldn't find the satellites. The whole thing felt wrong. I kept driving slowly, eyes straining through the fog. Then I noticed something else. The highway sounded different. The usual hum of tires on asphalt, the faint rumble of distant trucks, it was all gone. Completely silent except for the engine and my own breathing. No other vehicles. Usually, even this late, there'd be a few cars or a semi passing by. But this stretch, probably 5 or 6 miles, was empty. Dead empty. No headlights, no taillights, nothing. Just me and the fog. I tried to shake off the creeping feeling that settled in my gut. I looked around for road signs or markers, but the fog swallowed those too. I couldn't even see the guardrails on the side most of the time. I started checking my mirrors more than usual. Nothing behind me, no lights approaching, not even a blinking turn signal. At one point, I caught something in the fog just ahead, a faint glow, like a streetlight way off in the distance. I figured it was an exit or a gas station up ahead, but as I got closer, the light faded and disappeared altogether, like it never really existed. The GPS blinked off again, then back on. This time it showed my truck stopped at a rest area miles back near Lima. That was impossible. I'd been driving steadily forward, no stops. I checked the dashboard clock and the time felt off too, like the seconds were dragging or skipping. After what felt like forever, but probably was only 10 or 15 minutes, the fog thinned slowly, almost like it was being sucked away. Visibility returned in patches. First the yellow lane lines, then the outline of trees by the road, and finally the familiar shape of the highway itself. but the traffic still wasn't there. I finally saw a car up ahead, a rusty old pickup sitting at the side of the road, hazard lights blinking. No one inside, no driver around, just the truck, empty and quiet. I pulled over a little to check my phone for signal, but there was none. No bars, no messages, nothing. The sky was clear now, the stars out and bright. No fog, no weird lights, just the normal Ohio night. I took a deep breath, tried to make sense of it all. My GPS finally reset itself and started showing the correct location again. The clock on the dash synced back to the right time. I decided to keep moving, a little faster this time, just wanting to get past whatever that was. A few miles down the road, traffic slowly picked back up. A couple of cars passed me, and I noticed the radio was back on, static-free. By the time I hit the next rest stop near Bowling Green, everything felt normal again. I looked back over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see that thick fog trailing behind me or something lurking in the trees. But the road was empty, and the night was quiet. I still don't know what happened out there. The fog came fast, the GPS went haywire, and that stretch of highway was just gone. Like it wasn't even real for a while. I guess some nights on the road throw things at you that don't make sense. I'm just glad I was paying attention and didn't get too rattled out there. I told a buddy at the truck stop about it the next day, and he said sometimes weird stuff happens on those roads, but no one really talks about it. Maybe it was just a freak weather thing or a glitch. I don't know. All I know is I don't plan on driving that stretch after dark anytime soon. The first time I noticed those dead circles was just after my morning patrol at Cedar Creek State Park. I was walking down a trail near the southern edge of the park, right where the woods start to thin out into those open grassy patches. It was early June, so everything was green and thick, except for these spots. They caught my eye because they were weirdly perfect, like someone had taken a cookie cutter to the earth, circular, about the size of a campfire ring, and dead. The grass and small plants inside were completely withered, brown and dry, like a tiny patch of drought hit just there. But around them, everything was healthy, even lush. I circled the biggest one a couple times, poking at the soil with a stick. It was dry but firm, not like scorched or burned, just dead. The smaller plants nearby didn't seem affected. No smell either, nothing like you'd expect with decay or burning. Just quiet, like the earth had been starved of something. I figured maybe some kind of chemical spill or maybe a sick tree root underground, so I made a note to report it. But when I told the other rangers, none of them had seen anything like it. They thought I was maybe seeing things or had stepped in some old campfire ash. I went back a few times over the next week, and more circles showed up, always perfectly round, spaced out in a rough grid, maybe 10 or 15 feet apart. That's when it started getting weird. One night, I was out making a late rounds drive through the park, trying to get a feel for the place after dark. The park gets quiet at night, and usually I'm the only one around for miles. I pulled over near those dead patches, just watching. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but the biggest circle, the one I'd poked with the stick, started glowing faintly. Not a bright light, more like a pulse, like the whole patch was breathing softly, glowing just enough to make out the edges in the dark. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the glow stayed. It wasn't a steady light, but a slow, pulsing rhythm, almost hypnotic. Nothing else around it moved, and the woods were still. No crickets or frogs, just that soft pulse of light from the dead grass. I pulled out my phone to get a picture, but the light didn't show up on the screen, just the dead circle looking flat and brown like usual. I thought maybe the camera was just bad in the dark. I stayed there for a while, watching the pulse, but didn't hear or see anything else. No footsteps, no voices, no cars. The next day, I talked to some hikers and campers, asking if anyone had noticed anything strange in that part of the park. No one had. No weird lights, no strange smells, no sounds, just the usual wildlife and the usual folks out fishing or walking dogs. That night, I went back out, this time with a flashlight and a buddy from the park office. We watched the circles again. Sure enough, the biggest one pulsed faintly, the others didn't do much. My friend didn't see the glow at first and thought I was messing with him, but after a few minutes, he got quiet, staring hard. We stood there for maybe 20 minutes, listening. It was dead silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves far away. Then, out of nowhere, this low humming sound started. Not like a truck or a plane, more like a distant motor or a vibration deep in the ground. It wasn't loud, just enough to feel it in your chest and hear it faintly. We looked at each other, both trying to figure out if it was coming from the forest or the ground beneath us. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. My friend joked that maybe the park was haunted by a giant mechanical mole, but neither of us really laughed. Something about it felt off. After that night, I started keeping an eye on the area more. The dead circles didn't change much during the day, but every time I went out after dark, the pulse came back. Always the same slow rhythm, and sometimes that low humming sound would creep in, usually just for a minute or two. One night, I almost swore I saw movement near the edge of the woods, just a shadow slipping behind a tree. I called out, but there was no answer. The pulse kept going. I thought about chasing after it, but something held me back. It was like the whole place was watching, and I didn't want to be the one who walked deeper into whatever that was. Back at the ranger station, I asked around, hoping someone else might have noticed something, but it was just me. And the records didn't show any similar reports. Not in the last 10 years. No fires, no chemical spills, no wildlife die-offs, just these weird dead circles and the pulsing light no one else saw. I told my wife about it once. She smiled, said it sounded like one of those stories people make up to scare hikers, but she humored me. Still, she told me not to get too worked up over it. I'm not sure what to make of it. I don't think it's animals or human pranksters, and it's definitely not natural, not with how the patches look and act. But it's not like I've seen some glowing spaceship or weird creature either. Just this quiet, eerie thing in the woods, pulsing in the dark, like a heartbeat you can't quite hear but know is there. I keep watching, hoping for an answer, or maybe just a sign that I'm not losing my mind. For now, those dead circles stay, and the pulse keeps coming back as steady and strange as ever. I'm a farmer just outside of Tiffin, Ohio, and for the past few weeks, something's been happening to my fields that I can't quite figure out. It's not the kind of thing you'd expect in the middle of corn season, especially around here where weather patterns are pretty straightforward most years. But this, well, it's different. I keep a pretty close eye on my corn, everything from planting to the daily walks through the rows. The field sits on a bit of a rise, and the south end borders an old wire fence that's been there longer than I have. It's not much, just those standard steel posts with a few strands of barbed wire, nothing fancy. I usually walk that edge first thing in the morning before the heat of the day sets in. What started out as a small curiosity turned into a real head scratcher. Every morning, the stalks of corn closest to the fence would be bent, just the ones right by the fence line, and all of them bent the exact same way, like something pushed them hard enough to lean, but only at the edge. The rest of the field looked untouched, standing tall like normal. At first, I figured it was wind. It happens. Ohio's got those days when the breeze is strong enough to lean plants, especially this time of year. But I checked the weather logs, nothing unusual. No high winds, no storms overnight. And the direction the stalks bent didn't match any wind pattern reported. It was like some invisible hand pressed against the field's edge, pushing everything toward the east, every single morning. I started taking pictures just to keep track. The bending was consistent. Every morning, those stalks closest to the fence were leaning east, like someone was pushing them right before dawn. I thought maybe it was animals or even kids, but no tracks anywhere near the fence. Nothing disturbed in the dirt except the bent plants. Plus, I'd been out there before dawn and didn't see a soul or any signs of trespassing. One morning, I decided to get up earlier than usual and walk the fence line just as the sun was starting to rise. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything. The hum of cicadas starting up, a distant tractor in the next field, birds waking up. I didn't see anything out of place, no animals, no people, just the bent stalks like they'd been pressed flat. But something else caught my eye. There were faint scratch marks on the fence posts themselves. Not deep, just a few shallow grooves circling the wood, almost like a spiral. I ran my hand over one, and it felt fresh, like they'd been made recently. I don't know what could have done that. I thought maybe some animal with claws, but the pattern was too neat, too deliberate. That day, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Tom, who's been farming in these parts for 40 years. He gave me a funny look and said, "You sure you ain't imagining things? Corn gets bent all the time, maybe deer or wind." I told him about the scratches, but he shrugged and said maybe a raccoon or something made them. I wanted to believe that, but it didn't sit right with me. Another night, I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed a flashlight and went back out to the field. It was dead calm, no breeze, and the moon was just a sliver in the sky. I walked along the fence line, shining the light over the corn and fence posts. As I reached the middle of the field's edge, I caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the tree line that borders the fence. At first, I thought it was a deer or a raccoon, but the shape was too tall and too still. It wasn't moving like an animal would, more like it was watching me. I blinked, and it vanished. The way it disappeared was sudden, like it just faded away. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows or my eyes playing games in the dark. But the feeling of being watched stuck with me. I hurried back to the house, not bothering to check the rest of the fence. The next morning when I went out, the stalks were bent again, just like every day, but something new was there. The scratch marks on the fence posts had multiplied. They weren't just at the spots I'd noticed before. Now they were on every post along that edge, all neat spirals. I don't know how something could do that without me seeing or hearing anything. I started checking my phone every morning for the weather report, hoping for a logical explanation. Nothing out of the ordinary. The bending stalks, the scratches, the shadowy figure. None of it made sense. One afternoon, my cousin Mike came over. He's into hunting and knows his way around the woods. I told him everything, expecting him to laugh it off, but he got quiet and said, "You sure you want to keep poking around that fence? Sometimes things don't want to be found." I laughed it off, but the warning hung in the air. Over the next week, the pattern didn't change. Every morning, the same bent stalks at the fence line, the same spiraled scratches on the posts, and the feeling that something was just beyond the trees watching. One night, I left a camera on a tripod pointing at the fence, hoping to catch whatever it was doing this. The footage was weird. It was mostly dark, but around 3 a.m. there was a faint glow near the fence. Not like a flashlight or a lantern, more like a soft, diffuse light that moved slowly up and down the fence line. The light didn't have a source I could identify. No shadows from a person or animal. What got me was this quiet, barely audible hum on the audio track. Not a mechanical noise or anything familiar, just a low, steady vibration, like something vibrating in the distance but right there with the fence. I showed it to Mike and a couple other farmers. Mike said maybe it was just some electrical thing, but none of us could explain why the light would only be there for a few minutes and why the plants would be bent the next morning in the same direction. Since then, I keep a lantern on the porch and check the fence line every night before bed. I haven't seen the glow again, and whatever was watching me in the trees that night hasn't come back, at least not that I've noticed. But every morning, the corn right next to that fence is bent east, like an invisible wind pushes it just enough to lean. The rest of the field stands straight and proud, untouched. I don't know what it means or if I'm just losing it, but I'll keep watching. Because whatever's out there, it feels like it's trying to tell me something, or maybe just remind me it's there. Me and a couple buddies, Ryan and Jeff, we were out by Indian Lake one Saturday night last summer. We'd been cooped up all week, work, family stuff, whatever. So the plan was just to get away from everything, have a fire, drink some beers, and shoot the breeze under the stars. Nothing fancy, just us and the water. We set up our spot on this little peninsula where the lake narrows near the east side. It's a quiet place, not a big party area or anything, mostly locals who know the lake well. We brought a stack of firewood, some snacks, and a cooler full of drinks. The sky was clear, a little humid, typical Ohio summer night. There was that soft sound of water lapping on the shore and the occasional croak of frogs in the distance. We got the fire going just as the sun dipped below the trees. The flames were warm, crackling, and the three of us were sprawled out in folding chairs, just relaxing and catching up. Ryan was telling this story about his cousin's new boat, and Jeff was messing around with his phone, but mostly we were just soaking it in. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I noticed something weird out over the water. At first, I thought it was just a buoy or maybe some guy with a flashlight messing around, but this thing, it was a bright orb hovering right at the surface, just floating there, maybe 50 yards out from shore. It wasn't like a regular light. It was too steady and smooth, glowing with this almost soft white light that didn't flicker like a flashlight or a lantern. It slowly started rising up from the water, real slow, like it was pulling itself up or being lifted gently. I nudged Ryan and pointed it out. "Hey, check that out," I said. Both of them looked, and yeah, they saw it too. The orb rose maybe 6 or 7 feet above the water and started moving, straight toward the tree line on the other side of our little peninsula. The movement was steady and deliberate, no wobbling, no hesitation, like it knew exactly where it was going. The way it floated, it reminded me of one of those paper lanterns people let go at weddings or memorials, but it didn't flicker or drift sideways in the slightest breeze. We watched in silence for a few minutes as it glided toward the edge of the trees. As it reached the tree line, it just disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, no flash or anything, just gone. That's when things started to get weird. The fire, which had been roaring and popping along, suddenly sputtered. The flames flickered like someone blew on and then just died out completely, just like that. No smoke, no ember glow, just dark and cold. We all kind of froze, staring at the fire pit, then at each other. Then the usual night noises just stopped too. No frogs, no bugs, no water lapping. The whole area went silent. The kind of silence that makes your skin feel tight. We sat there, not saying anything, just listening to the nothing. Jeff finally whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" Ryan shook his head. "Hear what?" I wasn't sure either. It was like the world around us was holding its breath. We scrambled to get some matches and relight the fire, but nothing would catch. The wood was dry, but the matches just went out. We tried a lighter too. Eventually, we got some sparks, but nothing stuck. The whole time, that silence hung over us like a blanket. The orb felt like it had changed everything somehow, like it shut down the night. After maybe 10 minutes, the normal sounds started back up. The frogs came back, the water made noise again, and the fire finally caught and began to burn steadily. The three of us sat close to it after that, kind of looking at each other and knowing we'd just seen something none of us could really explain. I kept glancing toward the spot where the orb disappeared, but the trees were dark and still. No lights, no movement. We packed up not long after, talking about nothing much, just jokes to break the tension. The drive back to town was quiet. None of us brought the topic up again until the next day when Ryan asked if I'd seen anything strange near the lake before. I said no. It's been months since that night, and I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm out on the water or driving home late. Nothing like that has happened again. The lake's just a lake. I can't say what that light was or why the fire and everything went silent afterward. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It felt too real for that. I just know it was out there, moving slow and steady, then gone. And for a few minutes, the night stopped. It was the first weekend of November when I went out to Zaleski. The weather just dipped low enough that most folks were done for the season, but the early cold doesn't bother me much, and I like the quiet. I've hunted that patch of woods near Hope Furnace since I was a teenager. My uncle used to take me out there back before the trails were marked all nice and the backpackers started showing up every summer. I was on my own that morning, parked off Wheelabout Road just after 5. Still pitch black, air sharp. Had my 308 slung over my shoulder and a thermos of coffee in my pack. The plan was to hike up along the ridgeline northeast of the furnace and post up overlooking the clearing where the creek bends. That spot's always been good to me. Deer cut across the open space just around sunrise. It was quiet enough I could hear my boots pressing frost into the leaves. Birds hadn't started yet. I was about halfway up the ridge, maybe 20 minutes in, when I heard it, a clicking sound. Not loud, but real crisp, sharp enough that it carried. At first I thought it was a woodpecker, but it was too rhythmic. Like click, click, pause, click, 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 pause, click. Always in little sets like it was saying something. I stopped to listen, figuring maybe it was something mechanical. There's an old trail shelter not far from where I was, and sometimes backpackers bring those little hand crank radios. But this didn't sound like that. It didn't echo right. I took a few more steps up and paused again. Still clicking. Coming from upslope, maybe 50 yards off the trail. Deep enough into the trees I couldn't see anything, but the sound was steady. I stood there probably a full minute trying to place it. My gut was already telling me something was off. Now I've heard coyotes sound like screaming babies. Barred owls sound like drunks arguing in the dark. The woods make weird noises. But this wasn't natural. It was deliberate, measured, like someone tapping metal on metal in a pattern they'd practiced. I kept walking, slower now, ears up. Every 20 steps or so I'd stop and listen. The clicking kept pace, always the same tempo, like it was waiting. I had my rifle in my hands now, not raised, but ready. I veered off the trail toward the sound, figuring maybe somebody was out there screwing around, maybe another hunter being an idiot, or maybe someone had gotten lost and was trying to make noise. But there weren't any lights. No lantern glow, no flashlight sweeping, just the click, click, click in the dark. About 5 minutes off trail, I came up over a rise and into a patch of open wood, less underbrush. I could see farther between the trees. That's when the clicking stopped. Just gone. Dead silent. It took me a second to realize how quiet it'd gotten. No wind, no birds, not even the faint rustling from my own jacket, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I crouched near a hickory tree and scanned ahead, sweeping side to side. Nothing. I waited. After maybe 10 minutes of nothing, I stood and turned back toward the trail. But before I could take a full step, the clicking started again, this time behind me. I whipped around, rifle half raised, still no movement, still no lights, just the same slow, methodical click-click, pause, click-click-click. It felt closer now, maybe 30 yards. My ears were ringing from the strain of trying to pin it down. I raised the rifle properly and aimed toward the sound. Nothing visible, just dark trees and cold ground. But the second I shouldered the gun, the clicking stopped. Not faded, not shifted, just stopped like it knew. I stayed like that for a while, just like heart beating so hard it felt like a second pulse in my ears. I lowered the rifle again, just enough to rest it. Waited. Nothing. Then I moved. I didn't run, didn't want to make noise or trip, but I moved fast, back the way I came, eyes flicking behind every trunk, every patch of shadow. I was breathing through my nose, trying to stay quiet, but I could feel panic building in my chest. Back on the trail, I made it another 100 yards downhill before I heard it again. Fainter this time, like it was keeping its distance, just a couple clicks. Then silence. It followed me like that all the way back to the car. Never close. Just near enough I knew it hadn't left. I didn't stop once. Didn't look back. I got to the Jeep just before sunrise and drove straight out of there. I didn't notice until I was halfway back to MacArthur that my watch was off. By 23 minutes. I know that doesn't sound like much, but I check that watch every trip. It's solar powered and damn near never wrong. But it was behind my phone, which I'd left in the Jeep while I was hiking. When I got home and plugged the watch in, it reset on its own, back to the right time like nothing happened. Never done that before or since. I haven't gone back to that spot near the ridge. I still hunt Zaleski sometimes, but I stay near the main trails now, even when I know it means fewer deer. Whatever was out there, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person either, or at least not one I'd want to meet in the woods again. I was working third shift security at a mid-rise office building on Euclid Avenue, right near East 9th. Not the nicest building in the world. Mostly insurance offices, a dentist, and some kind of logistics company that always smelled like printer ink. But it was quiet, and the pay was decent enough for what amounted to sitting behind a desk, making rounds twice a night, and buzzing in the occasional janitor or food delivery. That night, it was a Thursday going into Friday, middle of January. Cold like it gets here, real sharp. Snow hadn't come down heavy, but the sidewalks had that thin, crunchy layer. Not enough for a plow, just enough to slip on if you weren't looking where you stepped. Anyway, around 1:15 a.m., I was sitting behind the desk eating a gas station turkey sandwich and watching one of those old true crime shows with the volume off, subtitles on. Lights were low. Heat was humming. Pretty normal. I glanced up at the security monitor for the front entrance, standard camera angle pointing out toward the street. You could see the glass of the door, the sidewalk, and then across Euclid, the old 5-story parking garage that hadn't been in regular use since the pandemic. Just sat there mostly empty now, except during games or when people parked for the courthouse. The roof of that garage sits just about even with the 5th floor of my building. I didn't notice it at first, but something caught my eye. A little motion on the roof of the garage, barely there. I figured maybe a bird or a raccoon. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was just sitting there. This dark shape, low to the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall at most. Not big, but it wasn't moving like anything alive either. It just sat there, almost tucked in behind the little concrete guardrail. Could have been a trash bag or a coat, I guess, but something felt wrong, off. Curiosity got the better of me, so I went into the stairwell and climbed up to the 5th floor break room. There's a big window there that looks right across to the garage roof. It was still there, sitting almost center on the roof, about 20 feet back from the edge, black or dark gray. Hard to get a clear shape through the glass, but it wasn't quite square, not round either. Kinda hunched like a crouched person, but a little too still, a little too low. No movement, not even a shiver from wind. I stood there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to twitch or shift or something. Nothing. Then I decided to try my flashlight. I carry one of those big Maglite style ones. Heavy, metal, beam goes a decent distance. I turned off the break room light so the glare wouldn't bounce, cracked the window open, and shined the flashlight across the street. The beam hit it square, and that's when I knew it wasn't any trash bag or bird. The second that light hit it, it reacted. Not fast, not sudden. It didn't jerk or run or flap. It just rose, straight up, like a balloon, but controlled, smooth, almost like it was riding on rails. I stood there completely still, just watching this thing lift, dead quiet, into the sky. It didn't spin or wobble, no rotors, no wings, no thrumming or motor sounds. It just ascended maybe 20, 30 feet above the roof. Then it paused. I swear to God it stopped midair and tilted just slightly, like it was looking at me. That's the part that really got to me. That tilt, it wasn't much, but something about it felt deliberate. After that, it kept going, slid upward into the low-hanging clouds and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. I stood there for a lot longer than that, trying to make sense of it. I even shined the flashlight around, like maybe I'd see it on another roof or higher up. Nothing. When I went back down to the lobby, the monitor feed for the front door had frozen, like someone had hit pause. I tapped the screen a few times, switched inputs, nothing. Just a still frame of the sidewalk. It stayed that way for close to 20 minutes before flickering back on by itself. Around 2, the janitor for the 3rd floor came in, Maria, and I didn't say anything to her. I didn't really feel like trying to explain what I'd seen. At 3:20, I did my second round. Nothing unusual inside the building, but when I got to the top floor, I went back to that break room window. The garage roof was empty. But here's the part I don't like to think about too much. On the snow covering that garage roof, there were no prints, no marks, just clean, unbroken white. Except for one thing, right in the center where that thing had been, there was a perfect round patch of bare concrete, maybe 3 feet across, like the snow had been melted or pushed away, but no pileup around the edge. Just gone. No dripping, no scatter, no disturbance, just a circle of clean roof. I watched that patch for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, until I started feeling dumb and cold. Nothing else happened that shift, or the next one. 2 days later, the patch was gone. Snow had come again, and it was all covered. I never saw anything like that again, but I did start noticing a few odd things after that. Random power flickers in the cameras, just for a second or two, and never consistent. A hum in the elevator that didn't used to be there, like a high-pitched tone just at the edge of hearing. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, I still glance at that rooftop from the break room. Not because I think it's coming back. I don't know what I think. I just can't stop looking. We were camped out at East Harbor, just a little up the road from Marblehead. Um, my wife, Kelly, had booked us a spot months ahead because she loves the lake this time of year. Not quite peak summer, so it wasn't swarmed with people, but still warm enough to swim, cook out, sit around the fire, all that. Our boys, Jake and Miles, were 9 and 7 back then, so they were still in that stage where everything's an adventure. We'd gotten there Friday afternoon, set up the tent, got the fire pit going, all the usual. That night, we stayed up late roasting hot dogs, listening to the waves come in. The campground wasn't right on the water, but if you walked a few minutes past the dunes, you'd hit the shoreline. We did that Saturday morning. Beach chairs, towels, little cooler of Gatorades. It was a normal trip. Sunburns and sand in everything. That Saturday night was the weird one. The kids had conked out early, all worn out from swimming and chasing gulls. Kelly was reading in the tent with her headlamp on, so I wandered down to the lake by myself around 10:30. I had a little collapsible camp chair and a cold beer from the cooler. Figured I'd sit for a while and listen to the water. It was real still that night. Barely any wind. You could hear every little splash. There were a few other folks down the beach, silhouettes mostly, some murmuring voices, the occasional flicker of a phone screen, but everyone was quiet. It was like even the kids felt the mood shift once the sun went down. Peaceful, but kind of heavy, if that makes sense. I'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was a barge or something way out there, just a row of white lights across the horizon, low to the water, but they didn't move. They weren't flashing or drifting. Just sitting there. I counted them. 9 lights, perfectly spaced, same size, same brightness. Pure white, no red or green like you'd expect on a boat. And they weren't reflecting off the water either. That was the part that got me. Lake Erie's flat as a pancake most nights. Any light out there should have had a long shimmer. These didn't. They looked like they were just hovering over the lake, like someone pinned them in place with string. I remember shifting in my chair, craning my neck, trying to make sense of them. I even looked behind me to see if maybe it was something reflecting off a camper's headlights or an overhead light from the park. Nothing. Everything behind me was pitch black, besides the glow from a couple lanterns tucked way back in the sights. Then one of the lights went out. Just blinked off. No dimming, no movement. Gone. The rest stayed steady. I sat up straight then. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was on alert. You know that feeling you get when your brain can't file something away quick enough? Like it's flipping through the cabinet looking for a match, but the folder's empty? A few seconds later, another light went dark. The second one from the left, then the fourth, then the third. Not random either. It was moving in a pattern, like counting down but not left to right. It was symmetrical, lights going out in a mirrored sequence from the outside in. By then, the chatter down the beach had stopped. I wasn't the only one watching. I could feel it, that kind of stillness that happens when everybody's holding their breath. Nobody said anything, nobody moved. We all just sat there watching this perfect line of lights wink out over the lake. The last two, the center ones, went dark at the same time. And that was it. Just black water stretching all the way out, no boats, no sound. Like nothing had been there at all. I waited, sat there for what must have been 10, maybe 15 minutes. But nothing else happened. No lights came back, no hum of engines, just the waves again. I finally stood up, stretched, started heading back toward camp. But the second I hit the sand trail back through the brush, I heard something behind me, not in the water but above it. A low pulsing sound. Not loud, but it had this pressure to it, like standing near a subwoofer. I turned, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shape. Not lights, a shape, dark against the darker sky. No edges, no real form I could describe, just something blocking the stars. Then it was gone. When I got back to camp, Kelly was already asleep. I lay there for a long time listening. No more noises, no movement, just crickets and the occasional rustle from another site. The boys were snoring. In the morning, I asked if anyone had seen anything weird out on the water the night before. Kelly said no, she hadn't even left the tent. The kids were too busy shoveling pancakes into their faces to care. But when we went down to the beach after breakfast, I noticed something strange. The sand where I'd been sitting was smooth, like untouched. No chair marks, no footprints, nothing. I know I was there. I remember the dampness under the chair legs, the little pile of bottle caps by my feet, but there was nothing there now. Like I hadn't gone down at all. I kept quiet, didn't say anything, but I stayed close to camp the rest of the day, and that night, I didn't go back down to the lake. Neither did anyone else. Name's Travis Morgan. I've worked at Cotner Auto on the east side of Columbus since I was 22. Started out doing tires and oil. Now I mostly handle diagnostics and electrical, that sort of thing. It's a family-run place, sits behind a strip mall off East Broad, not far from Mount Carmel. Real basic layout, 4 bays, front office, fenced lot out back. This happened last October, near the end of the month. I remember because we had that real warm stretch for a few days, then it snapped cold overnight. I was closing alone that night. Dave, the other tech, had taken off early to deal with his kid's school thing, and Mr. Cotner had already left for the day. Wasn't a big deal. I'd stayed late plenty before. I liked having the shop to myself anyway. It's peaceful when the compressors stop running and it's just you and the tools. It was a Wednesday. I had a Ford Edge up on the lift in Bay 3, replacing a rear wiring harness that had gotten chewed through. Possums or mice, hard to say. I had my music going low and was halfway through buttoning it back up when the lights flickered. Just once. Real quick. Everything cut for maybe half a second. Shop lights, music, even the laptop I had on the bench. Then it all came right back on. No breaker trip, no power surge alarm. Thought maybe AEP had hiccuped the grid, but nothing in the breaker panel looked off. We'd had some weird outages before, but usually not just a blink like that. Still, I didn't think much of it. Got back under the edge, zipped up the loom, and was torquing the bracket back in when all the motion sensors in the lot went off at once. Every single floodlight outside snapped on. Now, those lights are triggered by movement in 3 separate zones: front drive, side alley, and the fenced yard out back. They don't talk to each other. You can wave your arms in front of Bay 1 and not trip the ones out back, but they all lit up at the same exact second. I shut off my drill and stepped outside. It was cold enough I could see my breath, but still dead calm. No wind, no cars going by. The strip mall across the lot was closed up, lights off. The Pizza Hut 2 doors down was dark. I walked out past the garage doors and stood in the middle of the lot, looking around. No movement, no people, nothing I could see that should have tripped anything. But it was bright as hell now, all those floods on. Gave everything that weird flat color where it's hard to tell what time it is. I turned to head back inside when I noticed something overhead. 3 lights. Dim orange, spaced wide apart. They were coming in slow, real slow, from the west, just over the treetops behind the shop. No blinking, no sound, just steady glide. The way they moved, it felt heavy somehow. Like whatever they were attached to was big, but not struggling. At first, I thought maybe it was a low-flying plane, but the shape wasn't right. The lights were arranged in a triangle, with 1 leading and 2 behind, like a flat arrowhead. But the weird part was that I couldn't see anything between the lights. No outline, no structure, just 3 points moving in perfect sync, like they were connected by something invisible. It passed right over the shop. Dead silent. I stood there, jaw probably half open, watching it crawl overhead. If I had to guess, I'd say it was moving maybe 15-20 miles an hour, slower than any plane I've ever seen. No wings, no fuselage, nothing reflective, just those 3 steady, orange glowing points. As it passed, I felt something weird in my chest. Not fear, exactly. More like pressure. Like being underwater. Hard to breathe for a few seconds. My eyes watered a little. Then it moved on, kept heading east until it disappeared over the strip mall. I didn't move until it was gone. Just stood there like a dummy. Once I snapped out of it, I jogged back into the office and pulled up the security feed. Nothing. I went camera by camera, front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays. Not a single frame showed anything but static lights and empty pavement. Even when I scrubbed through the exact moment I saw it pass overhead, the cameras stayed normal. No glitches, no dark shapes, no reflection from the floodlights, just nothing. But here's the kicker. All the motion sensors had tripped. The logs showed every single one going hot at the same time, 10:38 p.m. I checked the motion logs regularly because raccoons sometimes set off the back sensors. But this was different. It didn't make sense. Nothing showed up on the video, and there was no movement in the lot. Just that triangle passing over, like it didn't care about being seen, but somehow still wasn't seen. I shut everything down after that, locked up and drove home. Didn't sleep much. I didn't even tell anybody the next day, felt too strange trying to put it into words. A couple nights later, I came in to check on a parts delivery we'd missed, and I noticed the radio in Bay 2 was on. I hadn't used that one in weeks. The volume was low, and it was tuned to some AM station I don't listen to. Just static. Like someone had turned it on and left it. Nothing else was touched. Tools were all where I left them. Doors locked. But that radio had been off. I'm sure of it. Ever since that night, I've kept a flashlight in my truck. One of those big ones with the crank. No batteries. I don't trust the power like I used to. I figured taking my boy fishing on the Scioto River would be a good way to spend a Saturday morning. Nothing fancy, just me, Jake, and a couple of rods. We'd done it plenty of times before, but that day, something about the air felt off, even before we got to the river. I couldn't put my finger on it. We got there just as the sun was clearing the trees along the bank, the water low and slow moving, just right for a quiet morning cast. Jake was already excited, like talking about catching his first bass bigger than last year's. I kept an eye on the sky. It was that pale gray, typical of early fall in Ohio, with some wispy clouds that didn't promise much rain. The kind of weather that makes you want to be outside but keeps you guessing. We set up near an old bend where the water pooled deeper, right by a patch of overgrown cattails. The bank was soft with mud and leaf litter, and there was that smell. Damp earth mixed with a faint hint of something metallic. I thought it was just the river, but looking back, maybe it was something else. Jake was eager to get started. He shoved his fishing pole out into the water, eyes wide and grinning. I followed with mine, then we sat back on the cooler, watching the water. The river was calm, almost too calm, with only a few ripples from the breeze. That's when I noticed it first, just beneath the surface, a round shape, perfectly still. It wasn't moving like a rock or a log caught in the current. It hovered there, maybe 3 or 4 feet from the bank, a little deeper than where we'd cast. It caught the sunlight, glinting off its surface with this unnatural shine, like polished metal or chrome. Jake saw it too. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. I didn't answer right away. It looked like some kind of old fishing float or maybe a piece of a buoy, but there was no rope or anything attached, and it didn't bob or drift with the current. It just stayed there, completely motionless, like it was waiting. Curious, I grabbed one of the oars from the little rowboat tied up nearby and carefully reached out to poke it. The moment the oar touched the water near it, the thing slipped down, not sinking with bubbles or stirring up mud. It just vanished deeper into the dark water without a sound or a single ripple. Jake and I just looked at each other. It was weird enough seeing something like that in the river, but the way it disappeared, that's what threw me. Nothing in that river moves like that. We waited, eyes peeled on the spot, but the water was calm again. No sign of it anywhere. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but Jake kept staring. He looked kind of shaken, like he wanted to believe it was a fish or something, but couldn't. We tried fishing again, but I couldn't focus, and that strange feeling settled in, like someone was watching us. Every little noise from the trees sounded louder. Every splash or rustle made me jump. About an hour later, I noticed something else. Our phones were dead. I mean, totally blank. I didn't think much of it at first, figured it was just low battery, but Jake's was fully charged that morning. We'd barely used them. Then the river got quiet in a different way. No birds, no bugs, just silence. Even the breeze died down. I looked up toward the treetops and the sky had gone almost completely gray, like the clouds thickened all at once, but without a drop of rain. We sat there, the three of us, me, Jake, and that strange quiet, and I swear, the river looked different. Darker, heavier, like it was hiding something just beneath the surface. I thought about calling it a day, but Jake begged to stay a little longer. We'd come this far. After a while, I noticed a flicker in the water where the round thing had been. Just a glint, quick-like, then gone. The water stayed still, like nothing had moved. I reached out with the oar again, slower this time. As soon as I touched the water near that spot, the same thing happened. It slipped away, but this time I caught a glimpse of it moving deeper, deeper, until it disappeared entirely. That's when Jake said he heard something, quiet at first, like a humming or low vibration coming from the woods behind us. I didn't hear anything at first, but then it got louder, this faint drone that didn't sound natural. It wasn't insects or wind, and it wasn't like the highway noise we could sometimes hear faintly in the distance. We packed up quickly after that, feeling this urgent need to leave the place. The humming faded as we moved back toward the parking lot, but my skin was crawling. Back home, I tried to check the photos I'd taken on my phone during the trip just to see if I caught anything unusual. Most were normal. Jake smiling, the river, the trees, but one shot showed the water right where the thing had been. And if you looked close, you could see a faint outline, almost like a shadow, round and smooth beneath the surface. I showed it to Jake, but he said he couldn't see anything. Maybe he was just trying to be brave. Me? I still stare at it sometimes, wondering what we saw, what slipped away without a sound, and why the river got so quiet afterward. I haven't been back to that spot since, and sometimes when the evening fog rolls in and the river's calm, I swear I can hear that low humming again, like something waiting just beneath the water. I was out in Athens one night with a couple of friends, just hanging around, looking up at the stars. It wasn't anything planned, just a spur-of-the-moment thing after we got out of class. It was late spring, so the nights were cool, but not cold, and the sky was clear, the kind of night you figure might be good for stargazing, if you have the time. We'd parked my friend Sarah's car near the edge of the university parking lot, right by those big open fields off East State Street, the kind where you can see a good stretch of sky without streetlights messing everything up. We had a couple blankets, some snacks, and a thermos with coffee from that little place on Court Street. I was sitting back on the grass with my phone off to the side, just watching the stars like I usually do when I'm not distracted by stuff. Sarah and Matt were beside me, both quiet, just taking it all in. Athens isn't exactly known for light pollution, but it's not pitch black either. The glow from town hangs low on the horizon, but up above, the stars looked real bright. I remember we were talking about nothing much, the usual stuff, what we wanted to do after graduation, plans for summer jobs, that kind of thing, when Sarah suddenly sat up and pointed. "Hey, look at that," she said. I followed her finger and saw a single bright dot sitting low in the sky. I figured it was just a plane or maybe a satellite, but then the thing started moving, and not like anything I'd ever seen before. It didn't drift slowly like a plane or blink like an airplane's lights. Instead, it shot straight up, like one of those fireworks you see on the 4th of July, except it didn't explode or disappear at the top. It just kept going straight up, accelerating faster than anything I'd ever watched in the sky. Then, when it reached a certain height, it started zigzagging, quick, sharp turns, like a kid playing with a drone, but way too smooth and silent for that. It moved across the sky in no pattern that made sense, darting left and right, up and down, almost like it was scanning the stars or playing tag with itself. And all this without a sound. We just sat there frozen, watching this thing move until suddenly it vanished, just disappeared, like someone flipped a switch. Matt was the first to break the silence. "Did that just happen?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, wide-eyed. "Yeah, that was insane." I tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping up on me. "Maybe it was a drone or something," I said, but even to my own ears, it didn't sound convincing. We sat there for a little while longer, watching the sky, but nothing else moved like that. Eventually, the air cooled down more, and we figured it was time to head back. That's when the other weird stuff started. When we got back to the car, Sarah reached in her pocket for the keys, and she went pale. "Guys, my keys," she said, voice shaking a bit. "They're gone." We all checked around the seats, the ground near the car, the spot where we'd been sitting. Nothing. Not a single key. We even walked the whole stretch of grass and parking lot, looking under cars near the curb. Nothing. Sarah kept saying she was sure she had them earlier, that she put them in her pocket, but the keys were just missing. I tried to stay calm, but I won't lie. Something about the timing was unsettling. That weird light show in the sky, and now the keys gone without a trace. I suggested maybe someone took them as a prank, but none of us had seen anyone else around. The parking lot was nearly empty, and it was late enough that most of the campus was quiet. Sarah called her roommate, and we ended up having to leave my car there and walk back to her place a few blocks away. The whole walk, I kept glancing back, feeling like we were being watched or followed, but when I looked, there was nothing but empty sidewalks and quiet streetlights. The next day, Sarah called the campus security to report the missing keys, and the lost and found people said no one had turned any keys in. We looked around again, retraced every step, even asked a few people if they'd seen anything unusual. No luck. Over the next few days, Sarah was stuck borrowing a spare key from her roommate, and all of us kept thinking about that night, about how strange the whole thing was. None of us talked much about it, but every time we looked up at the sky, I swear I half expected to see that same flicker of light again. I went back to that spot near the field a couple of times by myself, just to see if I could spot anything, but it was just like any other quiet patch of grass under the stars. No lights, no noises, no weird movements. And the keys? Never found. Sometimes when I'm driving home late from class and passing near that field, I feel this strange pull, like something is just beyond the edge of my sight. I try to tell myself it's nothing, just my imagination or the usual nerves from finals and all, but there's this quiet knot in my gut I can't explain. That night in Athens didn't feel like any other night. I don't know what we saw out there or what happened to those keys, but it's stuck with me. It feels like a small crack in the normal world, a place where something slipped through and then vanished without a trace. The porch light started flickering around 2 weeks ago. Not a constant thing, just once a night, right at 3:11 a.m. on the dot. I know the time because I'd wake up every single time half asleep, but noticing it like clockwork. The flicker wasn't like a bulb burning out or a loose wire. It was almost like a deliberate pattern, like someone was tapping the light switch on and off, quick but measured. I live just outside of Wayne National Forest, down a dirt road off Route 339. Quiet place. Not many streetlights around here, so when that porch light blinks, it stands out. I'm Mark Lawson. I work third shift at a warehouse in Marietta. That means I'm usually crashing around 10 or 11 p.m., so waking up at 3:11 is, well, it's annoying. At first, I thought it was just some electrical quirk, old wiring, a loose connection, whatever. But the funny thing is, my other lights inside the house never flicker. Just that one on the porch, and always at the same time. One night, after about a week of this, I was up late watching some TV, and that flicker hit again. I looked out the window, and beyond the edge of my yard, where the forest starts to thicken, I saw this. Blue glow. It was faint, but definitely there, hanging above the treetops. It didn't move like headlights or anything normal. It just hovered, pulsing gently. The blue wasn't neon or harsh, more like the color of a glow stick, but dimmer and somehow cooler. If you've ever seen those faint electrical arcs or a transformer sparking at night, it was like that, but more steady. The thing is, there was no sound. No humming, no buzzing, nothing that usually comes with electrical things out in the woods. I shrugged it off. Maybe some hunters had a campfire with blue lights or those LED things people use nowadays. But the more nights passed, the more I noticed it wasn't random. The light always appeared after the porch flickered, like a delayed response. I'd see the flicker at 3:11, and about 2 or 3 minutes later, the blue glow would be up there in the treetops. I started getting restless. My mind's a mess when I don't sleep well, but this was different. There was a weird stillness to those nights, like the usual forest sounds, crickets, owls, wind in the trees, just shut off, silence. I mean, not the usual kind of quiet. It was heavier, like the air was holding its breath. After about 10 days of this, I decided to set up some trail cameras around the property. Nothing fancy, just the ones you can get at Bass Pro or Cabela's. I put them along the edge of the forest, pointing toward the area where the blue glow usually appeared. Figured I'd get some photos of deer or raccoons, maybe some idiot ATV drivers cutting through the trees at night. For the first few days, the cameras worked fine. They'd pick up raccoons or squirrels moving around, maybe the occasional deer, just normal wildlife stuff. But on the nights when the porch light flickered and the blue glow showed up, none of the cameras recorded anything unusual. No flashes of light or strange shapes, just black frames with nothing there. Then last night, I woke up at 3:11 like clockwork. The porch light blinked 3 times, not just flickering, but definitely a pattern. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside. The air was colder than usual, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own breathing sharp in my ears. Looking toward the forest, the blue glow was there again, hovering maybe 50 feet above the treetops, faint and steady, like it was waiting for something. I felt drawn to it, but kept my distance. I decided to check the trail cameras before I did anything else, just to see if maybe they'd caught something this time. What I found made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Every single camera was powered off. Dead batteries, no blinking lights, nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. They were all turned around, facing the forest instead of pointing outward toward the yard like I'd left them. I'd set those cameras up myself a week ago. I know which way they were pointing. Whoever or whatever had turned them around did it deliberately. I stood there for a long minute, the blue glow still floating quietly above the trees. No sound, no movement, just the light and the night pressing in like a weight. I turned back toward the house and noticed something else. My phone was glitching. The screen flickered, like it was struggling to hold a signal. For a moment, all my notifications disappeared, and the screen went dark. When it came back, there was a faint blur on one of the photos from earlier in the day. Nothing I recognized, just a smudge in the background. I packed up the cameras this morning and haven't put them back out. Don't really feel like knowing more about what's watching out there. The porch light didn't flicker last night. It's weird how much you notice a little thing like that when it stops. The blue glow's gone too, at least for now. But the silence, that thick, unnatural quiet, it's still there sometimes when the wind dies down. I don't know what's out there beyond those trees. I'm not sure I want to. But every night around 3:11, I catch myself staring toward the forest, half expecting the porch light to blink again. I don't know how to explain what I saw that night, but I'm still thinking about it, even weeks later. I'm Tom Reynolds, and I've been farming out here near Delaware, Ohio for most of my life. The farm's been in the family for 3 generations now. It's nothing fancy, just a couple hundred acres of corn and soybeans, the usual Midwest stuff. Quiet place, especially once the sun goes down. This all started right after the first big snow last December. I was out doing my usual morning rounds, checking fences, making sure the equipment was good, and that's when I noticed something weird in one of the cornfields I hadn't gotten around to harvesting yet. One row, maybe 50 feet long, had all its stalks bent sharply at about a 90-degree angle, right in the middle of the stalks, like someone took each stalk and folded it over. The weirdest part? The plants weren't broken or snapped, not even cracked, just bent perfectly. I mean, this wasn't your usual snow or wind damage, and it didn't look like deer or raccoon damage either. Usually, if something steps on a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked deliberate, like some precise crease down the entire row. I ran my hand along a few stalks. They were stiff but intact, like cardboard that had been folded sharp but not torn. No signs of heavy machinery, no tire tracks, nothing. The rest of the field was untouched, no footprints or anything near that row. Just that one precise line of folded stalks. I figured maybe it was some freak accident with the weight of the snow pressing down unevenly. But even then, it didn't sit right. Snow was light that morning, and the rest of the field looked fine. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, but they don't really capture how odd it was. That night, the farm was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles when the wind dies and all the usual nighttime sounds stop. Around 11:30 p.m., I woke up because of a noise on the roof. It was pacing. I don't know how else to describe it. Like something big was walking back and forth up there, slow but deliberate. Heavy footsteps, maybe 4 or 5 steps, then a pause, then the same pace again. It wasn't like an animal, no scratching or scurrying, more like something that weighs a lot but was careful not to make too much noise. I lay there frozen for a bit, listening. After a few rounds, the noise stopped, and I waited for a while but didn't hear anything else. When I got up the next morning, I went outside to check the roof. Nothing looked disturbed. No dents, no footprints, no marks on the shingles. It had snowed lightly overnight, so I was expecting at least some tracks, but the snow on the roof was untouched, smooth like glass. I walked around the house, the barn, the shed. No footprints anywhere near the house, no tire marks, no animal prints. The snow was clean, like no one had been out there all night. I felt uneasy. It was like the noise had been there, but nothing had left a trace. That day, I went back to the field to look at the bent corn again. When I got closer, I noticed something else. The row of folded stalks wasn't random. It formed a sort of pattern. I'm not saying it spelled anything out, but the way the bent stalks aligned created a repeating spiral shape, kind of like a loose coil running the length of the row. It was subtle, almost like the corn was pointing somewhere or trying to communicate, but I can't say for sure. I'm not one for wild stories, but it looked deliberate. I ran my fingers over the stalks again, and the cold of the night still felt like it was hanging in the air there, even though it was the middle of winter. The rest of the day was normal. I kept expecting someone to show up, a neighbor or the sheriff asking questions, but no one did. No calls, no reports. That night, I stayed inside with the porch light on, half expecting that pacing noise again, but nothing. Just the quiet. Over the next few days, I kept going out early to check the field, but the stalk stayed folded, no change. The spiral pattern stayed sharp and clean, like someone was maintaining it, though I never saw anything or anyone. I thought about setting up some cameras, but I'm old school. I don't trust all that fancy equipment, and besides, it felt like whatever it was didn't want to be caught. Like it was watching me as much as I was watching it. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something moving near the tree line that edges the field. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a stray dog, but whatever it was, it slipped into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no snapping branches, just gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then last week, I was working in the barn when the power went out. Not just my place, the whole area. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, but off in the distance beyond the trees I could see a faint glow. It wasn't the usual orange or white from a nearby town. It was bluish, almost like the color of a police cruiser's emergency lights, but steadier, pulsing softly. The glow lasted maybe 5 minutes before fading completely, and the power came back on just as suddenly. The whole thing felt like a message, though I can't say what. Now the corn's all harvested, and the field looks normal again. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, the ground's soft and muddy. But sometimes when I'm out here alone, I swear I catch the same quiet pacing sound on the roof or a flicker of that strange blue glow through the trees. And every time, the hair on my arms stands up. I don't know what's out there. I don't know if it's someone watching, something messing with the fields, or just the way my mind's trying to make sense of all this. But the one thing I'm sure of is that row of corn, that perfect, sharp fold, that spiral pattern. It wasn't an accident. And whatever walked my roof that night, it left no footprints. I was out hiking alone in Mohican State Park one late September afternoon. I figured it'd be a good way to clear my head after a long week working the late shift at the factory in Loudonville. I'm John Miller, grew up around here, know the trails pretty well, but that day felt different somehow. Didn't really realize it until later. The sun was dipping low by the time I got to the part of the trail near Pleasant Hill Lake. The woods were quiet except for the usual. The rustling of dry leaves, a far-off bird or two settling in for the night. I'd been walking about 2 hours, mostly on my own, thinking about nothing in particular, just soaking up the quiet. Then I noticed something weird. At first it was just one little light, like a firefly, but a little too steady, kind of bluish white. It blinked on and off gently and hovered maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground near a cluster of oaks. I stopped and looked, thinking maybe it was a reflection from a camper's flashlight or something, but there was no one else around. The trail was empty, at least a dozen, maybe more, tiny blinking lights weaving through the trees and underbrush. They didn't move randomly like fireflies. It was like they were watching me, keeping pace, but never close enough to catch. When I moved forward a few steps, they floated just out of reach, shifting side to side as if teasing me. I stood still and watched them for a minute. The lights flickered softly, weaving through the tree trunks and between branches, keeping a kind of rhythm, almost like they were communicating with each other. It wasn't like any bugs or moths I'd ever seen. They were too steady, too precise. I raised my hand slowly, trying to touch one. It drifted away, always just out of reach, bobbing in the air like they were teasing me or maybe trying to lead me somewhere. The woods felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. It was peaceful, but there was an edge of something unfamiliar, like being watched, but not by an animal or a person. Then I tried moving faster, walking briskly along the path. The lights sped up too, bobbing and weaving just ahead, keeping pace with me. I started jogging, curious but a little nervous now. As I picked up speed, they followed, darting between the trees and keeping that teasing distance. My heart started beating faster, not from the exercise, but from the feeling of being trailed by something I couldn't figure out. The shadows were lengthening, and I realized the sun was almost gone. The woods were darkening fast. I thought about stopping, turning around, but the lights seemed almost friendly, like they wanted me to keep going. So I ran. They followed, blinking and weaving through the darkening trees like a dozen little ghosts. The sound of my feet pounding on the dirt mixed with the soft, almost electric hum I swear I heard coming from those lights. I don't know if it was real or just my imagination running wild. After about 5 minutes of running, the trail opened up to a clearing near the lake's edge. The lights gathered there, floating closer together, blinking rapidly like they were signaling each other. I slowed, catching my breath, and watched. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, all of them blinked out at once. The woods went completely dark and silent. No crickets, no wind, no birds, nothing. I stood there in the quiet for a long minute, heart still racing, looking around but seeing nothing but shadows and dark trees. I don't know why they showed up or what they were. Maybe some weird kind of insect behavior or a trick of the light. But I haven't seen anything like it before or since. It was like the forest was alive with something else that night. Something I wasn't meant to understand. I turned and walked back to my truck, the woods feeling heavier behind me with every step. When I got home, I sat on the porch a while, trying to make sense of it, but couldn't. That's all there is to it. I just keep wondering if those lights were watching me or leading me somewhere I never should have gone. I'm Kyle Harper. Been farming just outside Marion for most of my life. Nothing fancy, just a few hundred acres, a handful of cattle, and a lot of early mornings. I don't usually talk about weird stuff, but what happened last spring still bugs me, and I figured maybe putting it down in words would help me sort it out. It started just before dawn one morning. I got up early like always, grabbed my coat and boots, and headed out to check on the herd. The nights had been cold, but that morning had this kind of strange stillness. No birds singing yet, no wind stirring the trees, just quiet. I noticed right away the cattle weren't where I left them the night before. Usually they spread out a bit, grazing or lying down in the pasture. But this time, as I walked closer, I saw something that made me stop dead. The whole herd was bunched up in a tight circle about 50 yards from the barn. They weren't moving, just standing there, shoulder to shoulder, all facing inward, heads lifted up like they were staring straight at the sky. I called out to them, clapped my hands, even whistled a little, but they didn't flinch, just stood there quiet and still. The air felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe they'd just gotten spooked by something. I circled around, checking the ground, looking for any signs of a predator or some disturbance, but nothing. No tracks other than their own hoof prints leading in. I spent a while watching them and trying to see if they'd move, but after maybe 10 minutes, I figured they'd probably settle down once the sun came up. I headed back to the house to grab my phone and maybe call the neighbor to see if they'd noticed anything. When I came back out, it was just getting light. I noticed the fog was still hanging low over the fields, thick and heavy for that time of day. I walked closer to where the cattle were standing and spotted something else. On the ground near their feet, there were these scorch marks. Dark, circular patches in the grass, about 2 or 3 feet wide each, like something had burned the earth but didn't catch anything else on fire. I knelt down to look closer, running my fingers over the scorched spots. They were dry, crisp at the edges, but there wasn't any ash or burnt grass scattered around, just those clear, round patches. I looked for footprints, figuring maybe some machinery or something had rolled through there, but the ground was untouched except for the cattle prints. No boot prints, no tire tracks, nothing. The cattle still wouldn't move. They just stood there, almost like they were glued in place. I called the neighbor again, but all I got was the answering machine. I figured maybe I should try the sheriff or something, but honestly, I wasn't sure what to say without sounding crazy. I stayed with the cattle until the sun was fully up, and by then they started to break the circle, slowly moving away like nothing had happened. When they finally spread out and began grazing again, the tension in the air seemed to lift a bit. I checked the scorch marks one more time, but they hadn't changed. The rest of that day, I kept looking around the field, checking for anything unusual, but everything else was normal. No strange noises, no unusual smells, just quiet. That night, I sat on the porch with my dad, told him what I saw, and he just shook his head. Said maybe it was just one of those things animals do that folks can't explain, but I wasn't so sure. In the days after, I kept thinking about those scorch marks. I went out to the field early again, and each time I checked, the patches were still there, exactly the same. No signs of weather wearing them away or anyone messing with them. I even tried shining a flashlight on the ground in the dark, thinking maybe they'd glow or something. Nope. Just dark circles in the dirt. Plain as day. No one around town seemed to know what to make of it when I mentioned it. Some joked about UFOs, but I didn't say much. I wasn't sure if that's what it was, but something definitely wasn't right. I never found out what made the cattle act like that or what caused those scorch marks. The whole thing felt like a quiet kind of weird, creeping under your skin, you know? I still check the pasture now and then, especially early mornings. So far, nothing else like that has happened. The cattle are back to their usual slow-moving selves, and the fields look just like they always did. But I keep wondering about that quiet circle of cows staring at the sky, and the ground that looked like it'd been burned, but without a single footprint to explain it. Whatever it was, I can't say I want to see it again. I'm not sure how to start this without sounding crazy, but here goes. My name's Rachel Morgan. I work as a wildlife biologist around Wayne National Forest, down in southeastern Ohio. Mostly I monitor animal activity through trail cameras I've set up in various spots. Deer, coyotes, the occasional bobcat, that sort of thing. It's usually pretty routine, nothing out of the ordinary, besides the usual Ohio forest noises and critters going about their business. But over the last few months, something's been off. I first noticed it a couple of weeks ago, just after dusk one Saturday. I was out checking a camera near one of the deeper trails, a spot where the forest thickens and it's quiet except for the wind and leaves. The sky was clear, and I remember feeling kind of peaceful, the way you do when you're out away from everything. But then, out of nowhere, I caught this weird flicker of light just above the tree line. Not a firefly, nothing like that. It was this soft, pale glow, pulsing gently, shifting from a cool white to faint blues and greens, almost like those old Christmas lights, but floating up there. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was just tired or the light was a reflection or something. But it stayed for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, pulsing slowly. I took my phone out to snap a picture, but the screen just showed the usual dark treetops and sky, no lights. When I looked back up, it was gone. The next day, when I downloaded footage from that camera, it was offline for the entire night, like it just shut down or lost power. The battery was full, memory card intact, no damage. That's when I started paying closer attention. Over the following weeks, every time those pale lights showed up above the canopy, all the cameras in that area went dead, completely offline. No signal, no footage, nothing. It wasn't just one camera either. I had 5 in the area, spread out across a few miles, and every one of them stopped working the exact same nights. What's stranger is how the animals acted the next day. Normally, after a storm or something loud, you see animals cautious for a little while, then back to normal. But after these nights with the lights and dead cameras, the animals avoided the area completely for days. Trails that usually had fresh deer tracks or raccoon prints would be barren. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I told my supervisor about it, expecting maybe a technical glitch or interference. He suggested I check for any radio signals or nearby construction that might be messing with the cameras. I ran every test I could think of. Nothing. No interference, no signs of animals tampering with the gear, no electrical faults. One night, I decided to stay in the forest until after midnight, just past when the cameras went offline. I brought a small tent, a camp stove, and a handheld radio, just in case. It was quiet, maybe too quiet. No crickets, no owls, just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Around 11:15, that same faint glow appeared again above the treetops. This time, it was a little bigger, more defined, almost like a cluster of tiny orbs moving in slow, deliberate patterns. They hovered for a few minutes, then faded away. Right after the lights vanished, I noticed the radio went silent too. Not static or interference, just dead. The batteries were fine, but the radio wouldn't pick up anything. No signals, no weather alerts, no chatter from the ranger station a few miles away. I packed up and left that night feeling more unsettled than I had in a long time. Back at home the next day, I checked the trail camera footage again. All 5 cameras were still offline, and even the backup cameras I'd set on the forest edges showed the animals avoiding the area. Not just deer or raccoons, even smaller critters like squirrels and birds seemed gone. I couldn't explain any of it. The lights, the dead equipment, the silence, it didn't fit any pattern I knew. I went back the following weekend, this time with a friend who's a fellow biologist. We staked out the area again, hoping to see something or maybe catch a better look. But the lights didn't return, and the cameras stayed offline. What's weird is that the rest of the forest was totally normal. You'd think if something strange was going on, it'd spread out or be noticed by more people. But nothing. Just this one patch of trees, like a bubble where time and nature were acting different. I keep checking the cameras, hoping they'll come back online, but they don't. The animals haven't returned either. I'm still working the area, still trying to make sense of it, but every time I go out there, I feel like I'm walking into something I'm not meant to see. Like the forest is keeping a secret. And I guess that's the thing. Sometimes you see things that don't fit your world, and there's no good explanation. You just live with the quiet feeling that something's out there, watching, waiting. It was a Friday night in late October, the kind of night that felt like fall was already hanging by a thread, even though the calendar said otherwise. Me and my wife Jamie were driving back home from visiting her parents out near Canton. We'd taken the back roads, nothing fancy, just the usual stretch of Route 30 through some of those farm fields and patches of woods you see around Stark County. I like that drive, especially at night. Quiet, mostly empty, and you get that weird feeling like you're the only ones left in the world. About an hour into the drive, just past a spot where the trees thin out and you can see the horizon, the fog rolled in. At first, it was just a little mist, the kind that settles low to the ground and makes the fields look like they're disappearing into nothing. But then, almost like someone flipped a switch, it got thick. Real thick, the kind that feels like you could reach out and touch it. It wasn't like normal fog you see around here. It was denser, almost unnatural. We couldn't see past maybe 20 feet in front of the car. Jamie started fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station through the static. The dial spun for a bit, then went dead. No static, no stations, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound, the soft hum of the engine, the tapping of the windshield wipers, even the thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. We slowed down to a crawl, but it felt like the fog was closing in, swallowing the road behind us as much as in front. The headlights barely cut through the haze. Jamie kept asking if I thought we should turn around, but I told her we'd keep going slow until the fog lifted. We had no cell service, of course. This part of Ohio still has those dead zones, and the fog wasn't helping. About 10 minutes into the thick fog, I glanced down at the GPS. It still showed the route, the little blue line stretching ahead. But then I noticed the estimated time of arrival. It had jumped. Before the fog, we had about 25 minutes left to get home. Now it said 55 minutes. I double-checked, thinking it was a glitch. But no, the route was still the same. The road we were on hadn't changed, but the GPS was saying we'd somehow lost nearly half an hour. Jamie noticed it too and frowned. "How the hell does that even happen?" she muttered. I shrugged, trying to keep calm. Maybe the signal's just screwing up because of the fog. We drove a little longer, both of us quiet. The fog stayed thick, but the weirdest thing was how silent it was out there. No insects, no frogs, no distant trucks. Even the crickets were gone. It felt like we'd entered some kind of bubble where sound didn't exist. Then, out of nowhere, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had come. 1 second it was there, dense and choking, and the next it was like someone peeled back a curtain. The stars were out, the moon bright enough to light up the road. We were near a familiar bend, one that usually takes about 5 minutes to reach from where we'd been stuck. I checked the GPS again. It still showed the route, but now the estimated time of arrival was back down to 25 minutes, like before the fog. That didn't make sense at all. We'd been driving for nearly 15 minutes in that fog, yet somehow the GPS was saying we'd covered ground faster than possible, or maybe that time had just slipped away. Jamie looked over at me with this nervous laugh. Did we just lose time or something? I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was probably just a glitch, but I couldn't explain how the radio cut out, how the fog came and went so fast, or how the animals we'd seen earlier along the roadside had vanished. We passed a few fields where cows usually grazed, but that night, not a single one stirred. For the next few miles, things felt off. Every so often, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind us, but there was nothing. No cars, no trucks. Usually, even late at night on a Friday, someone's out there. Not this time. Just the two of us, driving through empty blackness. Jamie kept trying the radio. After the fog cleared, it came back on, but the only thing we could pick up was this faint, humming static. Almost like white noise, but with a rhythm, like it was pulsing just beneath the surface. I don't know how long we drove like that, but eventually we got back to a stretch where the streetlights started popping up and cell service returned. The radio came alive with local stations again, and the normal sounds of traffic filled the air. Neither of us said much about what happened that night, had I, but something in the way Jamie looked at me when we pulled into the driveway told me she felt it too. That weird, hollow feeling, like we'd been somewhere we shouldn't have been. I kept replaying it in my head for days. The fog, the dead radio, the lost time on the GPS. The whole thing just didn't add up. I checked online and asked around, but no one else reported anything like that on Route 30 that night. No fog warnings, no radio outages, nothing. Sometimes when I'm out on the porch at night, I swear I catch glimpses of that same faint glow in the distance, just out beyond the tree line where the fields stretch out. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but it stayed with me. I guess some things just don't come with answers. I don't usually tell people about this, mostly because it sounds nuts when you say it out loud. But it happened, and it's the kind of thing that sticks with you, even when you want to just shrug it off. I'm Mike Dalton, born and raised just outside Akron, Ohio. I like to ride my bike, mostly at night when the streets are quieter, less cars, less noise. Helps me clear my head after work. This was back in late October, a cool, damp kind of night. The kind where the air smells like wet asphalt and leaves, you know? I had just finished a late shift at the shop and figured I'd take the long way home through the part of town near the highway. Not busy at all at that hour. Maybe a couple cars here and there, mostly trucks hauling in or out of the industrial parks. I was riding down West Market Street. The wind was steady but not too cold, and I had my headphones off because I wanted to listen to the city's hum. The distant hum of traffic, the flicker of streetlights. I was just about to cross over the highway bridge when I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. Above the highway, maybe 100 feet up, there were these lights. They weren't the usual kind, not like plane lights or the blinking of a radio tower. They were colored, pulsing softly, shifting from deep blue to green to a faint red. And they weren't just random either. They moved in a pattern. Slow, deliberate, almost like someone was drawing shapes in the sky with those lights. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of drone show, like one of those events where they launch coordinated lights. But it was the middle of the week and there wasn't any festival or anything scheduled. Plus, the patterns were weird, like geometric shapes overlapping and dissolving, kind of like a slow kaleidoscope, but floating there in the dark. I stopped my bike right at the railing, staring up. The air felt thicker around me, and the streetlights seemed dimmer, like they were being swallowed up by the dark. The sound of cars on the highway was muted too, almost like someone had hit the volume down on the whole world. I pulled out my phone and tried to get a picture, but the screen just showed the empty sky. No lights, no shapes, nothing. I fiddled with the camera a bit, thinking maybe it was a glitch or the angle. I even tried the flashlight, shining it toward where the lights had been, but all I got was the usual night sky with a few stars. That's when a patrol car came barreling down the highway below. Its headlights cut through the dark, and the blue and red of the cruiser's flashing lights passed right beneath where I'd seen those colored pulses. The moment the cruiser went by, the lights vanished. Just gone. Like someone flicked off a switch. I looked around for anyone else on the bridge or nearby sidewalks, but there was no one. No cars pulled over, no joggers, no other cyclists. Just me. I called out quietly, but no answer. I even thought about shouting something to the empty street, but it felt stupid. I started riding again, but the whole time I felt like something was watching me from the trees lining the highway, or maybe from the tall buildings on the edge of the city. Like whatever had been making those lights was still out there just waiting. When I got home, I checked the local news and social media. No reports, no videos, no chatter about weird lights over Akron that night. Nothing. The next few nights, I went back to the same spot at the same time, hoping to see those lights again, but nothing. Just the usual highway glow and street lights humming in the distance. It's been months now. I ride past that bridge sometimes, and I swear I catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, like a soft pulse of color that disappears if I look straight at it. But every time I try to get my phone out, the sky is empty. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a trick of the light or some new kind of advertising drone no one told me about. Maybe it was just me getting tired after work. But the feeling of the silence around those lights, the way the world seemed to quiet down right before they vanished, that's something I can't shake. I worked the late shift as a janitor at one of the high schools out in Dayton, Fairview High, if you know it. It's the kind of job where you pretty much have the place to yourself once the last class lets out, and the whole building feels empty, quiet, and sometimes a little too still. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every creak and groan of the old building settling. This one night, I was finishing up by the gym, mopping the floor near the locker rooms, when I started hearing this low, steady humming sound. At first, I thought it was just the air conditioning or maybe the old pipes humming through the walls, but it didn't quite fit the usual noises. It was more persistent and kind of unnatural. Not loud enough to be annoying, but enough to make me stop and listen. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to step outside for a bit to get some air. It was late October, so the air was crisp and the playground lights were off except for that one old street lamp near the entrance, flickering on and off like it was about to give out. I figured the humming might be easier to track outside. As soon as I stepped out the door, the humming got clearer, and that's when I saw it. Floating just above the ground near the far edge of the playground, by the swings, this pale, glowing orb. It was maybe the size of a basketball, but it didn't shine like a regular light bulb or anything. It was more like a soft, pulsing glow, with colors shifting just a little from a dull white to something almost bluish. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things at first. I blinked a couple of times and rubbed my eyes, but the thing was definitely there, hovering maybe 3 feet off the ground, just swaying slightly in place like it was suspended on a breeze. The school's yard was dead quiet except for the hum, and there wasn't a single other person around. I felt my stomach tighten, the way you do when something's not right, but you can't say what. My first thought was to call someone, maybe maintenance or the principal, but my phone was dead, no bars at all, which isn't unusual on that side of the building. Instead, I took a cautious step closer, keeping my flashlight aimed at the orb. The closer I got, the more the humming seemed to fill the air, like it was vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The orb flickered once, like it was reacting to me, then suddenly blinked out. Just like that, gone. I stood there blinking, expecting maybe it would come back, but nothing. Just the quiet night and that faint smell of ozone that seemed to hang in the air where the orb had been. You know that sharp, clean smell, kind of like when there's a storm coming or after a lightning strike? That's exactly what it was. I felt kind of dumb standing there, staring at empty air, so I turned back toward the school. As I walked back, I noticed the humming was still there, but much fainter, almost like a whisper, fading with every step. Back inside, everything was normal, the old building creaking and groaning like usual. I checked the security cameras near the playground on my phone. No sign of anything strange, just empty swings and shadows. Nobody reported hearing or seeing anything unusual, not that I'd expect them to in the middle of the night. I told the night supervisor about it the next day, and he laughed it off, said I probably just saw some kind of reflection or drone. I wasn't so sure. It wasn't a drone. No blinking lights, no sound of rotors, and the way it moved wasn't mechanical. Over the next few nights, I kept an ear out for that humming again. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a faint glow near the playground, but it never stayed long, and I never got close enough to see more. Animals around the schoolyard seemed skittish too. Cats and raccoons avoided the area, and birds kept flying off whenever I got near. The whole thing stuck with me because it felt like something watching, or maybe waiting. I don't know what it was or why it came around the school, but whatever it was, it left an impression. Nothing dramatic, no flashing lights or beams, just that slow, steady hum, the pale glow, and that strange ozone smell hanging in the night air. I work as a postal carrier out here in Perry County, a pretty quiet part of Ohio, mostly farmland and woods, not much traffic or noise. I've been doing this route for about 4 years now, mostly the same roads winding through small townships and stretches of nothing but fields. I know everyone's mailbox by heart, and I usually spot anything that's out of place before I even get close. One morning in late October, I started my shift like usual, but something caught my eye right away. Several mailboxes along a stretch of my route had these strange carvings on them. I don't mean your usual name or house number. These were odd symbols, almost like runes or something you'd expect to see in a history book, not on a mailbox. I pulled over to get a better look. The symbols were cut into the wood, fresh looking too, like whoever did it worked overnight. The lines were clean, precise, but the shapes didn't make any sense. A circle with a vertical line through it, a sort of sideways hourglass, and a few others I couldn't even describe. The wood looked scraped away, but not splintered, like it had been carved carefully. I'm used to seeing graffiti or damage sometimes, teenagers messing around or stray kids getting bored, but this wasn't like that. There was no spray paint, no names, no slogans, just these quiet, weird marks. And it wasn't just one mailbox. 3 or 4 in a row had these symbols, all different but part of the same style. I snapped a few pictures on my phone, even texted one to my wife with a, "Check this out, weird, right?" She said maybe someone was trying to start a cult or something dumb like that, but honestly, it felt weirder than that. I finished my route and went home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I was up late watching TV when I heard it. This low humming sound coming from outside. It wasn't loud, more like a deep vibration you could feel in your chest. I went to the window and looked out toward the valley. The whole place was still, but that hum was there, steady, almost like the earth was thrumming. I stepped outside on the porch and the humming seemed to get a little louder. I thought maybe it was some equipment from a nearby farm or a generator running, but there was nothing visible. No lights, no machines, just that quiet, pulsing sound. It reminded me of those bass notes at a concert, but out here in the middle of nowhere, it felt out of place. The weirdest thing was that the humming didn't just stay put. It seemed to move with me when I walked around the yard, like it was following or circling me, but when I stopped moving, it got quieter. I checked the time. It was close to midnight. I went back inside, but I couldn't relax. The hum faded over the next couple hours until dawn started breaking. When the sun finally rose, the sound was gone. The next morning, I drove out early to check on the mailboxes again, thinking maybe someone came by overnight and left more carvings, or maybe it was some prank I could explain. But the symbols were the same, no new ones added. I ran my fingers over the carvings again. The wood felt cold, colder than the morning air, and that faint smell of ozone was in the air, like after a thunderstorm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I tried asking around town if anyone else had seen the symbols or heard the humming, but no one did. A few people said they'd noticed some strange lights on the horizon the night before, but no one really knew what to make of it. I went back home that night, sat on the porch, but didn't hear the humming again. I looked up at the stars, feeling that same uneasy quiet. Something was different out here, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what. I still deliver mail every day. The mailboxes with those carvings, they're still there. Nobody's painted over them or removed them, like the town doesn't want to talk about it. I take pictures sometimes, but I don't tell many people. It's the kind of thing you keep to yourself, and the humming, I never heard it again. But every now and then, late at night when the wind's just right, I swear I can catch that low vibration in the air, just on the edge of hearing. I don't fish much, but my wife Lisa, she's always been into it. So last summer, we decided to spend a weekend out at Grand Lake St. Mary's. It's a big spot out in western Ohio, kind of a mix of shallow areas, some open water, and plenty of places where the fog likes to roll in early morning. We figured it'd be a good way to get away from everything for a couple days. We got there the night before and camped near the shore. Early the next morning, we launched the little boat we borrowed from a friend, just an old bass boat with a 25-horse engine, nothing fancy. The water was still calm, and there was this thin mist hanging low over the lake. It wasn't thick fog, more like a curtain you could see through, but it made everything feel softer, quieter. We found a good spot near one of the marshy edges where the reeds grow thick. Lisa was baiting hooks, and I was just enjoying the silence. The kind you only get way out on the water with no one else around. The sky was a pale gray, and the mist was shifting, curling over the water like smoke. After a while, I noticed something odd out in the mist, maybe a couple 100 yards from us. At first, I thought it was just a boat, but it wasn't moving like one. It was this irregular shape, almost like a dark shadow hovering above the water, but not reflecting any light. It didn't have any clear edges or form, kind of like a smear or a smear of oil on the surface. It barely showed against the gray mist, but I could see it was there, staying in one place, maybe drifting a little with the breeze. I nudged Lisa and pointed it out. She squinted, adjusting her hat against the damp air. "What is that?" she whispered. We decided to move the boat a little closer, just to see if it was something familiar. A fishing platform, maybe a duck blind, or a fallen tree. But as we got within maybe 100 feet, the engine started sputtering, like it was running out of gas or choking on water. The sputtering got worse until the motor died completely. Just like that, we were floating, the mist wrapping around us, dead silence, except for the faint slap of water against the hull. Lisa checked the throttle, but the engine wouldn't catch. I fiddled with the cord, but nothing. The batteries for the electric trolling motor were charged, so I switched that on to keep us from drifting too far. We sat there looking back at the shape. It hadn't moved, but the mist seemed to get thicker around it, like it was pushing the fog outwards, leaving this empty space between us and it. After what felt like 5 or 10 minutes, it could have been longer, honestly, because my sense of time was weird, the shape just vanished. The mist shifted, and suddenly there was nothing but open water where it had been. I reached for the ignition, and this time the engine roared back to life like nothing was wrong. Lisa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We headed back toward the shore, slow and quiet. On the ride in, I kept glancing back over the water, but the mist was lifting as the sun rose, and there was no sign of that shape again. The rest of the day, everything felt normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The lake had that same calm surface, but I kept feeling like we weren't alone. Later that evening, after we'd packed up and were driving back towards Salina, Lisa mentioned she'd heard a low hum, barely noticeable, when the engine died. I told her I hadn't noticed it, but thinking back, I realized there was this strange vibration in the air when the motor sputtered out, like the whole world was holding its breath. We didn't say much about it after that. It felt strange, like something we couldn't put a finger on. We talked about the weather, the fog, maybe some kind of weird water condition messing with the engine. But the way the motor came back on the second that shape disappeared, that was the part I couldn't explain. Now, whenever I drive past Grand Lake, I think about that morning. The water looks the same, but the memory of that shadowy shape in the mist sticks with me. Quiet and still, like it was watching, and I wonder if it's still out there waiting for someone else to see it. I was out hiking near Hocking Hills one weekend last fall, just trying to get away from the usual grind. My name's Mark Jensen. I live in Columbus, been coming out here for years when I want some peace and quiet. This time I took a trail that cuts through a less popular part of the park, near Rock House, hoping for fewer people. The woods were quiet, the kind of stillness that feels thick, like the air itself is holding its breath. After maybe a mile in, I noticed something off. The ground ahead looked like it had a series of small, perfectly round depressions in the dirt. At first, I thought maybe some animal had dug a bunch of holes, but these were too uniform, each about the size of a softball spaced evenly apart. They formed a pattern, a neat geometric shape like a triangle with some lines crossing through it. The dirt inside the circles was packed down but smooth, almost like someone pressed something heavy there and moved on. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edge of one. No leaves, no twigs disturbed, no footprints near it. The soil smelled earthy but a little metallic, weird enough to catch my attention. I took a couple of photos on my phone, figuring maybe it was some kind of natural formation or maybe an old surveying mark, though I've never seen anything like it before in Hocking Hills. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched crept in fast. The woods felt less inviting all of a sudden. No birds singing, no squirrels darting around like usual. The trees stood motionless, no breeze at all. It was like the whole forest had gone quiet. My steps slowed and I glanced behind me a few times. Nothing but shadows. I made it back to my car just before dark. The sky was turning orange, the kind of sunset you see over the hills when the sun slips behind the trees real slow. I figured I'd head home, but something told me to stick around until it got fully dark. I set up my small camping stove at a pullout near the trailhead, made some instant coffee, and waited. That's when the howling started. At first, it was soft, distant, like a low, drawn-out moan rolling through the trees. It didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard, too deep and mournful, almost human, but not quite. The sounds bounced between the hills, echoing like they were coming from all directions at once. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line, but there was no movement, no eyes reflecting back. I even called out once or twice, but no response, just more of that low howl. I didn't hear any rustling or snapping branches, which you'd expect if there were coyotes or dogs. It was like the noise existed all by itself without a source. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I debated packing up and leaving, but something kept me rooted there, staring into the dark woods. After maybe 20 minutes, the howling faded into silence again, just like it had come. I stayed awake, ears tuned for any sign of life, but the woods were still dead, quiet except for my own breathing and the distant hum of cars far down the road. I drove back to Columbus after that, feeling rattled, but telling myself it was probably just my imagination or maybe some weird animal calls mixed with the wind. But the next day, I looked back at the photos of those depressions. When I zoomed in, I thought I saw faint thin lines connecting the circles, like someone had drawn a shape in the dirt with a stick. The pattern wasn't random at all. I haven't gone back there since. Part of me wants to, but another part doesn't. I still think about those howls sometimes in that quiet forest. It's like something was there watching, waiting, but I'll never know what exactly. I was camping out near Malabar Farm State Park, just outside of Lucas, for a weekend to get some space from the dorms and everything going on with classes. Figured a little solo trip would clear my head, nature and all that. I set up my tent on a small clearing off one of the lesser used trails, not too far from the main road, but tucked enough that I thought no one would bother me. I'd been out there maybe 6 or 7 hours before I crashed for the night. I remember waking up feeling off. Like everything was just wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why at first. It was around 3 in the morning, though I didn't know the time until later. When I sat up, the air was colder than I expected, even though it was late spring. The tent walls were kind of damp, and I could smell the earth, fresh and wet from earlier rain. The moon was out, just enough light filtering through the trees to see shadows and shapes. The weird part was how dizzy I felt when I stood up, like the world was tilting slightly, but there was no reason for it. I stepped outside the tent and my foot hit mud. I looked down and saw footprints, big ones, circling the tent. Not just one circle, but 2 or 3 overlapping rings. They looked fresh, like someone or something had been pacing around all night. I froze for a minute, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it, but the prints were real, no doubt about it. They were too big for me, maybe close to a size 12 or bigger. Muddy but not sloppy, like whoever made them was careful. Then I reached for my watch on my wrist, and it wasn't there. I always wore it camping. It was the only clock I had. I checked the tent floor, my backpack, pockets, nothing. Feeling a little freaked out, I grabbed my phone, but the battery was dead, which was weird because I'd charged it fully before I left. I guess I hadn't realized how long I'd been out there, or how little signal I'd get in that area. As I shone my flashlight around, something else caught my eye. About 20 feet from the tent, on the trunk of a big oak tree, were shallow scratch marks carved into the bark. At first, I thought they were random, but as I stepped closer, I noticed the scratches formed a spiral pattern. It wasn't natural. The marks were jagged but deliberate, like someone had taken a knife or a sharp stick and carefully made that shape. I circled the tree, shining the light all around, looking for more marks. There were smaller spirals on some of the nearby trees, all within maybe 50 feet of the tent. The bark looked freshly torn, still raw and light-colored under the dark outer layer. That's when my head really started spinning a little, and I realized I couldn't remember exactly how I got to that clearing. The trail I took, I had a fuzzy image in my mind, but it was hazy, like a dream I was only half awake for. I backtracked from the tent, following the muddy footprints that ran out into the woods in a loose loop before disappearing into thicker brush. The prints weren't deep, but they were there, and they didn't look like anything I'd ever seen, at least not human. I felt like I was being watched. But whenever I spun around, all I could see were trees and shadows. No sounds except for the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I didn't want to stay out there any longer than I had to. I packed up as fast as I could, but the unease didn't leave me. Before leaving, I took one last look at the trees with the spiral scratches, and that pattern just stuck with me, the strange, deliberate rhythm of it. On the way back to my car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling the same tight knot in my stomach I'd felt since waking. When I finally made it to the parking lot, it was nearly dawn. My legs were sore from the hike back, and the morning sun felt too bright after the night. I still don't know what happened out there. The muddy footprints, the missing watch, the scratch marks, they don't add up. I told a couple of friends, but they laughed it off, said maybe some drunk camper or animals or my imagination. But I'm certain about what I saw. Something was there in the dark near my tent, circling, watching. And those spirals in the trees weren't natural at all. I've been back a few times since, but I don't camp out near that clearing anymore. I still think about it sometimes when I'm walking through campus, how something so quiet and slow could feel so wrong. I was out hiking by myself in the Clifty Wilderness over near Pike County one late September weekend a few years back. I liked the quiet out there, nothing fancy, just the woods and the trails winding through those limestone cliffs. That day was clear but cool, perfect for hiking without sweating buckets. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just wanted to get out of Columbus for a bit, clear my head. I'd parked at the trailhead just before noon and started up the path that leads past those big rocky outcrops people always talk about. I've been around those parts a few times before, but that day felt different. Sort of quiet in a way that makes you notice things you usually tune out. The usual birds were there, sure, but they weren't singing much. Even the wind was low, barely rustling leaves. Anyway, I was maybe a mile in when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was just a woodpecker or some kind of bird knocking on a tree, but the sound didn't come from any tree. It was coming from the cliff face to my right, that huge gray wall of limestone that rises about 20 feet or so. The noise was a soft but distinct knock, knock, knock. Slow, steady, like someone was tapping with their knuckles. I stopped, tilted my head, trying to figure out if it was natural or just some animal. The rhythm was too regular, too mechanical to be random. I took a few steps closer to the rock face, eyes scanning for movement. Nothing. No birds, no people, no tools or equipment, just the stone and some scattered vines. The knocking kept going. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. It was like a pattern, repeating the same set of 3 knocks, a little break, then 3 more. I counted and it kept going like that for a good 5 minutes. I called out, thinking maybe someone was up on the cliff or out of sight. "Hey, you okay up there?" Nothing but the knocking and the quiet woods. I walked around the side of the cliff to see if I could find anything, maybe a climber or a hunter, but the trail was empty, and the rock face was bare except for a few small bushes. After a while, the knocking just stopped. No warning, no slow fade, just silence again. It was strange because the rhythm had been so deliberate, like someone was trying to send a message or get my attention. I waited a few minutes, but nothing else happened. I wasn't scared exactly, more like confused and a little on edge. I kept my phone out and even recorded some of the knocking sounds just in case. The recording was faint, but you could definitely hear the rhythm if you listened close. I thought maybe it was someone messing with me, or maybe some weird echo from rocks or loose stones shifting. But there was no wind to move rocks or make anything rattle, and the rhythm was way too consistent for random noise. On the way back down the trail, I kept glancing around, half expecting to see someone lurking or watching me, but I didn't. The woods were quiet again, almost unnervingly so. My phone lost signal, so I couldn't call anyone or check anything until I got back to town. That night, I went through the recording again. The knocking was definitely there, and half clear and repeating. But there was also this faint background sound I hadn't noticed before, a sort of low hum, like the wind far off, or maybe a distant engine. But I knew the roads were miles away, and it wasn't a car or truck. It almost felt like it was coming from inside the cliff itself. Over the next few days, I told a couple of friends about it, mostly just to share the story. Nobody else had heard anything strange in the Clifty area. The park rangers I contacted were polite, but didn't really have any explanation. They said sometimes rocks can expand or contract in weird ways and cause noises, but nothing that regular or patterned. I figured maybe it was a weird natural thing I just stumbled on. I went back a week later, hoping to hear the knocking again or find some clue. The cliffs looked the same, quiet, still, and normal. No signs of anyone around. No new marks or anything unusual. I waited in the spot where I'd heard it, sat with my back against a tree, but the knocking didn't come back. Still, something about that rhythm sticks with me. It wasn't random or natural, not like I'd ever heard before in the woods or anywhere else. I keep going over it in my head, wondering if I imagined part of it, or if someone out there was trying to communicate, or maybe warn me about something. I don't go out hiking in that part of the park alone anymore. Not because I'm scared, exactly, but because I don't like that feeling of being watched by something I can't see or understand. The woods have always been peaceful to me, but after that day, There's this quiet tension I notice when I'm near those cliffs. I still think about going back, maybe with someone else this time, but part of me wonders if it's better left alone. That knocking was a signal of some kind, I'm sure, but I don't know to what or to whom. I was coming back from Millersburg around 9:30, maybe quarter to 10. Took longer than I planned at my friend's place. She'd made apple dumplings, and you don't exactly rush out on something like that. I had about an hour's drive back to New Concord, and it was one of those real clear nights. Cold and dry, sky just full of stars. I cut through the back roads to avoid Route 62, quieter, and I like driving past the farms. It's darker out that way, sure, but it's peaceful. Just me and the road and the smell of wood smoke sometimes drifting in through the vents. I just passed a little produce stand that was closed up for the season. You know, one of those self-serve setups with the honor box nailed to a post. When something caught my eye up above the treetops. First I thought it was clouds, but there weren't any. Then I figured maybe a patch of smoke drifting across the sky. But it wasn't moving like that. It wasn't moving much at all, just sort of floating there. It looked like a part of the sky had gone dark. Not black exactly, just darker than the rest. Like if you spilled ink on a map and it dried funny. I slowed down and leaned forward, trying to see through the windshield better. That's when I realized it wasn't that I couldn't see stars. It was that they were gone, blotted out. This thing was huge, bigger than a barn, probably bigger than a football field if I had to guess. Real slow moving, kind of creeping along. No lights, no noise, nothing. Just this mass sliding through the sky like it was weightless. My first thought was maybe it was one of those military blimp things, surveillance something or other, but I didn't see any blinking lights, no red or white nav stuff. And anyway, this didn't have any shape I could really pin down, no angles, no real outline, just a low, wide darkness against the stars. I pulled off to the side of the road and turned off my headlights. Sat there in the silence with the engine idling for a second, then shut that off too. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Like, too quiet. No crickets, no wind, no frogs from the ditch. Even the cows in the distance had gone still. Dead quiet. The kind of quiet where your ears start to ring a little. I stepped out, just holding the door so it wouldn't slam. The gravel crackled under my boots, and it was like the sound got swallowed up. I stood there in the ditch next to the road, staring up. The thing kept moving, real slow, drifting west, just above the tree line. Maybe a couple 100 feet up, but it was hard to tell. No lights, no sound, no scale. It was like it was absorbing the sky around it. I swear it made the stars on either side of it look dimmer. And then it stopped. Not in a jerky way. It just sort of ceased moving, hovered there, totally motionless. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My breath was fogging in the cold, but I don't think I was breathing much. I backed up a couple steps toward the car without looking away, and just then the thing started moving again. Not toward me, just sideways, gliding like a shadow being pulled across the sky. It slid behind a line of tall trees, big sycamores along a fence row, and didn't come out the other side. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe more. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just that dead silence. Then everything came back at once. Crickets started chirping like someone hit play. A wind kicked up, made the dry leaves rattle in the ditches. Off in the distance, a dog barked twice. I remember that because it was the first normal thing I'd heard in what felt like minutes. I stood there a while longer, watching the sky. My hands were shaking. Not bad, but enough I noticed. I climbed back in the car, turned the key, and drove the rest of the way home with the radio off and the windows cracked. Just listening. Didn't tell anybody at first. Not even my brother, and we talk about everything. I just didn't want to hear all the usual stuff. Drones, planes, satellites. I know what I saw, or I know what I didn't see. I didn't see wings, engines, lights. I didn't hear a thing. Nothing man-made moves like that. Not that big, not that quiet. A couple nights later, I drove back out there with him. We pulled over near the same spot, just past that produce stand. Brought some binoculars and a thermos of coffee, sat on the hood for maybe an hour. But the stars were steady that time. Nothing weird, just cold and quiet and normal. He believed me anyway. Said he'd heard other folks in the area talk about strange lights or weird noises, though nothing quite like that. We didn't really talk much on the way back. I think we were both trying not to think too hard about it. I haven't seen it again. I still drive that route sometimes, especially in fall when the trees turn, um, but I keep my windows up now, and I don't stop anymore. I was hauling a load from Cincinnati up toward Columbus late one Friday night, just trying to make good time and get home before the weekend really kicked off. I-71's usually not too bad at that hour, mostly just the occasional semi or some late night drivers. I figured I'd stop at that rest area just past London. Kind of a habit, you know? Stretch my legs, grab a coffee from the vending machine, check my rig, that sort of thing. The rest area is nothing fancy. Just the usual pit toilets, some picnic tables, and the trash bins near the edge of the parking lot. I parked my rig, grabbed a cup of coffee, and stepped outside. It was one of those crisp, late fall nights, the kind where you can smell the wood smoke drifting in from nearby cabins even though you're nowhere near a town. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the side of my truck, looking up at the stars, just minding my own business. That's when I noticed it. This reddish glow hovering maybe 5 feet above the trash bins. At first I thought it was one of those weird reflections from the brake lights or maybe a taillight from a car passing behind the trees. But it wasn't moving like a car light would, and the color wasn't right. More of a deep, steady red, like a glowing ember. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was about the size of a basketball, maybe a bit smaller, and it just hung there, silent and steady. I didn't hear a thing. No buzzing, no humming, nothing mechanical. The air was still except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I stepped closer, figuring maybe it was some kind of drone or prank. But the closer I got, the more I realized this thing wasn't just sitting still. It was watching, I guess, or waiting. Without warning, it darted away faster than anything I've seen, but with this smooth, almost gliding motion. It zipped right into the tree line, disappearing behind the thick brush near the edge of the woods. I stood there for a second, my heart pounding a little, but no sound followed it, not even the rustling of branches or twigs snapping. Just gone. That's when I noticed the smell, a faint, almost chemical scent in the air, kind of like burnt plastic mixed with something sweet and metallic. It wasn't strong, but it was definitely there, and it made my stomach turn a bit. Then came the ringing in my ears. Not loud or painful, more like a low, high-pitched buzz that settled deep in my skull. I covered my ears, but it didn't go away right away. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds, just enough to make me uneasy. I looked back toward the trash bins, but everything was normal. No lights, no glow, no movement. The rest area was quiet, except for the occasional distant hum of an 18-wheeler down the highway. I got back in my truck, locked the doors, and tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd been staring at a reflection too long or was just tired, but I kept thinking about that orb and the weird smell. The whole thing didn't add up. I drove off, but I swear for the next half hour I felt like something was riding along with me, just out of sight. I kept checking the mirrors, but nothing. The road was empty. By the time I got home in Columbus, the ringing had faded. I told my wife about it and she smiled like I'd lost it, told me to get some sleep. I tried, but my mind kept circling back to that glowing thing, just hovering, then vanishing. I've been back to that rest area since, a few times on different runs. Nothing like that ever happened again. No weird smells, no glowing orbs, no ringing. I don't know what it was. Sometimes I think maybe I imagined the whole thing, or maybe it was some weird natural thing, like a ball lightning or something. But I can't explain the smell or the ringing. It was quiet, fast, and just not right. I guess that's all I got. Just some night, a red light, and a smell that stuck with me. I was walking home from my shift at the auto parts store in North Toledo. It was late October and the air had that sharp bite you feel just before winter really sets in. I usually drove, but my car was in the shop, so I hoofed it, about 1.5 miles from the store to my place near the Old Mall District. That night was just like any other, or at least I thought so. I passed the Walmart on Monroe Street. It was closed, obviously, since it was nearly 11 p.m. The parking lot was empty, except for a couple of maintenance trucks near the back. As I walked past the front doors, I noticed something odd right away. There was this disc-shaped object hovering maybe 30 feet above the roof. It was silver, flat, and round, like a frisbee, only way bigger. Not blinking or flashing, just hanging there, perfectly still and silent. At first, I figured it was some kind of drone or maybe one of those advertising blimps they sometimes fly over big stores. But this thing didn't move or shine a spotlight or anything. No sound at all. It was just there, almost like it was watching. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heartbeat sped up, but not enough to freak me out completely. I wanted to call someone or at least take a picture, but my phone was in my pocket, and suddenly it felt like the whole world around me had quieted down more than usual. Then, the streetlights on the block flickered and went out, like someone had flipped a switch. The power cut out completely, for 7 seconds. I timed it by the rhythm of my own breathing. It was pitch black, except for the faint glow of the moon above the clouds. I remember thinking how weird it was to have the whole block go dark all at once. No cars moving, no street lamps, nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it went out, the power snapped back on. The streetlights blinked on, the neon Walmart sign buzzed back to life, and the security cameras on the building clicked and whirred like they'd rebooted. But the disc was gone. I stood there, looking up where it had been. No drone, no blimp, no airplane. Just the normal Toledo night sky with a scattering of stars and some faint city glow. I didn't hear any engines or sirens or anything unusual after the lights came back. I checked my phone, signal was back, no missed calls or messages. I kept walking, but something about the whole thing stuck with me. On the way home, I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see it following me or hovering somewhere else, but there was nothing. I told my roommate the next day, and he gave me that look like I'd been watching too many late-night shows. I didn't blame him. A week later, I went back by that Walmart around the same time. The block was lit up, cars parked, people coming and going like usual. Nothing strange about it. No weird discs, no power outages. I didn't check the news or anything. It didn't seem like anything anyone else noticed, which made me feel even more isolated. I guess what I remember most clearly is the silence, the way everything just stopped for those 7 seconds, like the world paused and held its breath, and how after it started again, nothing was the same, but you couldn't quite put your finger on what had changed. That's all. Just a disc, a blackout, and a night that felt like it stretched longer than it should have. I still think about it sometimes when I'm walking home late. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, maybe not. But whatever it was there. I was driving home from a long day at the plant in Chillicothe, just the usual grind, you know? It was late August, so the sun was already dipping low, casting that warm orange glow across the fields. I was on State Route 35, heading out of town toward my place on the edge of Ross County. My wife Lisa was with me. We were both quiet after the day, just soaking in the slow fade of daylight through the window. I remember passing that big cornfield just past the edge of town, the one by the old Miller farm. Usually, it's just rows and rows of tall green stalks swaying with the breeze, nothing out of the ordinary. But this time, something caught my eye. Up above the field, about 30, maybe 40 feet off the ground, there was this shape. It was black as pitch, and it didn't look like any drone or helicopter I'd ever seen. No blinking lights, no noise, no rotors spinning, just a solid, matte black form hanging there perfectly still like it was watching the field. I slowed down the truck and nudged the wheel to the shoulder. Lisa looked at me, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't say anything. I don't think either of us could figure out what we were looking at. The sun had just gone behind the trees, so it was dim, but not dark yet. The shape stood out against the deepening sky, like a shadow detached from anything. We both stepped out, the evening air cooler than I expected, with this sudden chill that made my neck hairs stand up. There wasn't a sound except for a faint rustle of corn leaves moving. The weird part was, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, and quiet like everything else had been muted. Lisa shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. I pulled my phone out, but my screen was fogged over and the signal dropped to 0 bars. Figured maybe it was just dead or the trees were messing with it. I tried snapping a picture anyway, but every time I pointed the camera at that shape, the screen went black. Then I noticed the corn below it. That's when my stomach dropped. The stalks weren't just bent or pressed down from wind or rain. They were flattened in a perfect spiral, tight and uniform, circling out from right beneath the shape. I've seen plenty of crop damage before from storms and farmers walking fields, but nothing like this. The stalks were smashed flat, almost as if someone had stepped in a circle over and over, but no footprints or tire tracks anywhere near. Lisa and I looked at each other, and I swear the silence got heavier. I couldn't hear the crickets, no birds calling, nothing except this unnatural hush. The shape stayed still, like it was watching us, but with no eyes or lights. Then, after maybe a minute or two that felt like hours, it slowly drifted backwards over the field without a sound, like it was gliding on air. I got back in the truck, still staring at that black form as it moved away from the road, going deeper over the cornfield. It just vanished behind the trees on the far side. No trail, no glow, no flicker. Just gone. We drove home slow, both of us quiet, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I kept thinking about that spiral in the corn. How perfect it was. How unnatural. The next day, I drove by again in daylight, but the field looked normal. The stalks were upright, no sign of any damage. I asked around, but no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. The strangest part was how calm everything seemed afterward, like the whole town was pretending nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. I don't have answers. Just that shape hanging there, the cold air, and the corn laid flat in a perfect circle. It stayed with me. This quiet, heavy feeling like something was watching, waiting, and then disappeared without a trace. I usually go for a jog right around dusk, especially during the warmer months when the sun starts dipping, but there's still some light left. That stretch through Five Rivers Metro Parks in Dayton is my favorite. Quiet, plenty of trees, and a good trail that keeps you shaded most of the way. Nothing fancy, just me, the path, and whatever nature throws at you. This one evening, it was close to the end of June, and I just hit a spot where the trees get thicker near the river. I was about halfway through the loop when I noticed something off, but I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The air felt different, like it had dropped a few degrees all at once. You know how the humidity usually hangs heavy around here in summer? Well, suddenly it was like someone turned the AC way down. I was moving at a steady pace, earbuds in, but low enough to hear the world around me, when the birds, normally chirping and calling, especially that time of day, went totally silent, just stopped. No flutter, no tweeting, nothing. That was weird enough on its own, but then I saw it. Between the trees off to my right, something was moving, but not like an animal or a person. It looked like a ripple in the air, almost like the heat shimmer you get over pavement on a hot day, but it was out of place here. The shimmer was thin and stretched out, like a translucent sheet sliding smoothly between the trunks. The weird part was how big it was, taller than me and wider than the trail. It moved slow, like it was drifting, but there was no sound. No leaves rustling, no branches creaking. I stopped running and pulled out my phone to check the time and glance at my watch, which is one of those smartwatches with GPS and all that. The screen flickered, and the GPS signal dropped to 0 bars for a moment. First time that's ever happened out here. It came back quick, but that moment felt heavy, like a pause. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. The shape kept moving, barely perceptible, staying mostly behind the thicker trees. I could only catch glimpses of it, that odd shimmer shifting as it slid forward. I wanted to get a better look, but this place can be rough if you step off the path, lots of underbrush and uneven ground. Still, the silence got deeper. Even the bugs had gone quiet. Normally, you get crickets or frogs chirping by the river, but there was nothing. I figured maybe I was just imagining things, but my skin prickled, and I felt that old sense of being watched, like the kind you get when a deer locks eyes with you before bolting. So I took a few careful steps closer toward the shimmer. Then the birds nearby took off all at once, like some invisible line had triggered them. The sudden rush of wings was loud after that silence, and the shimmer vanished, just folded into the shadows between the trees. I stood there for a minute, heart racing, trying to catch my breath for reasons beyond the run. I checked my watch again, still showing 0 GPS signal. It flickered a couple more times before coming back, like it was trying to get a lock. I decided to keep moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was following me or watching from the woods. My pace slowed, and every crackle of a twig or rustle of leaves made me spin around. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and that thick evening air. By the time I got back to the parking lot, my phone had full signal again, and the birds were back to their usual noise. I told myself maybe it was just some weird heat waves and my watch glitching in the humidity. But the silence, that shimmer, the signal dropping, it didn't add up. I haven't gone back to that part of the trail since. It's not like I'm afraid of the woods or anything. I just don't like feeling like I'm not alone, especially when no one else saw a thing. I was hauling a load from Cleveland down to Indianapolis one spring evening, rolling through northwest Ohio just past dark. I'm Dave Carter, been trucking for over 15 years out of Toledo, mostly flatbed runs and the occasional refrigerated trailer, nothing fancy. Anyway, this night I pulled off at the rest area near Lima to take a break and grab a bite from my cooler. It was one of those small, quiet spots, a few picnic tables, some dim streetlights, and the usual scattering of trucks parked along the lot. I shut off the engine and climbed out to stretch my legs. Right away, I noticed my phone was acting weird, battery dropping faster than normal. I mean, I was at like 80% when I parked, but after just a couple minutes outside, it was down to 60. I figured maybe the cold was messing with it, but it wasn't even that chilly yet. I checked the phone again a little while later, 50%. That felt off. I pulled my jacket tighter and looked up. The sky was mostly clear, just a thin haze near the horizon, but then I saw it. A faint, dim orange glow hovering above the treetops on the far side of the lot. Not like the usual city lights or a sunset either. It was soft, like a lantern stuck in fog, but there wasn't any fog. It stayed there, unmoving, just hanging low in the sky. The orange light wasn't bright enough to cast shadows or light up anything around it, but you could tell it was there. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired or seeing things. I wasn't drinking or anything, just a long day on the road. Curious, I stepped away from the truck and checked my phone again. It had dropped another 10% in less than 5 minutes. Every time I moved further from the truck, the battery drained quicker. When I stepped back inside, it stopped. Weird, right? I fiddled with the keys, thinking I'd fire up the truck and keep moving, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Just that clicking sound like a dead battery. I figured maybe the truck's battery was finally dying, but the lights inside the cab came on fine. I tried a few more times, nothing. I wasn't too worried yet. I had jumper cables, and if it came to that, I'd call a buddy or the company for help. I decided to pace a bit, trying to clear my head. The orange glow was still there, sitting just above the tree line like it was waiting for something. I scanned the rest area with my flashlight. A couple of trucks farther down had their engines running, but no one was out. The weird part was the silence. No crickets, no distant cars driving by, not even the usual hum of the highway nearby. It felt like the whole place had been muted. After 10 minutes, I gave the engine another try. This time, it started right up. I was about to roll out, but the glow was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. I checked my phone again. Battery was back to 78% and holding steady. I shook my head, thinking maybe my brain was playing tricks. I'd never experienced anything like that on the road before. As I pulled back onto the highway, my radio started crackling with static and faint voices, like someone was trying to talk, but it was too far away to make out. It only lasted a few seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I kept watching the sky for that orange glow, but it never showed up again. At home, I charged my phone fully and checked the battery health. No problems. The truck started fine the next day too. I don't know what that was. I don't have a clue. But I remember that glow, the way my phone drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until it disappeared. I just wanted to get home safe.